Hey everyone! Welcome back to Muse Fanfiction. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Gringotts revealed Harry was the reincarnation of Arthur Pendragon and he claimed Excalibur at age 6? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The sword in the stone. The cupboard under the stairs smelled like dust and old shoes and something faintly chemical that Harry had never been able to identify. He'd stopped noticing it years ago, the same way he'd stopped noticing the way the door stuck when Aunt Petunia locked it from outside, or the way the spiders built their webs in the same corner no matter how many times he brushed them away. He was awake before the sun. He was always awake before the sun. Harry lay on his thin mattress with his eyes open, staring at the underside of the staircase where a nail had come loose and poked through like a crooked finger. He could hear Uncle Vernon snoring 2 floors up, a sound like a walrus drowning in porridge. In about 40 minutes, Aunt Petunia's alarm would go off, and 3 minutes after that, the lock on his cupboard would click open, and the day would begin the way every day began, with a list of things to do and a reminder, spoken or implied, that he should be grateful for the roof over his head. He was 6 years old, and he was not grateful. That was the thing the Dursleys never quite understood about Harry, the thing that made Vernon's face go purple and Petunia's lips go white. He wasn't broken. They'd tried, not with beatings, nothing so dramatic, but with the steady, grinding pressure of being treated like something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. The too small clothes. The meals that were always a little less than enough. The locked cupboard. Dudley's fists. The lies told to neighbors about the troubled boy they'd so generously taken in. None of it had worked. Something in Harry simply refused to bend. He didn't know what it was. He just knew that when Vernon screamed in his face, there was a place inside him that stayed perfectly still, perfectly calm, like the surface of a deep lake. And sometimes, when the stillness was very deep, strange things happened. Locks opened. Glass vanished. Once, when Dudley's gang had chased him behind the school, he'd somehow ended up on the roof. Harry flexed his fingers in the dark and waited for the day. The alarm went off at 6:15. The lock clicked at 6:18. Harry was already dressed, Dudley's hand-me-downs, a shirt that hung to his knees and jeans cinched with a bit of rope, and he pushed open the cupboard door and padded into the kitchen to start breakfast. Bacon. Eggs. Toast. Coffee for Vernon, tea for Petunia. Orange juice for Dudley, who wouldn't drink it but would scream if it wasn't there. Harry moved through the routine with mechanical efficiency, a small figure dwarfed by the oversized stove, standing on the step stool Petunia had grudgingly provided after he'd burned his wrist reaching over a burner. Vernon came down first, already stuffed into his Grunning's tie, his mustache bristling with the self-importance of a man who sold drills for a living and believed this made him a captain of industry. He dropped into his chair without looking at Harry. He never looked at Harry if he could help it. Dudley's got his friend Marcus coming over today, Vernon announced, snapping open the newspaper. You'll stay out of sight. Yes, Uncle Vernon. And Petunia wants the garden weeded before lunch. Yes, Uncle Vernon. And don't, Vernon lowered the newspaper just enough to glare. Don't do anything abnormal. Harry set the plate of bacon and eggs in front of him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make things worse. He'd learned that lesson early. The still place inside him held, calm and deep. Dudley thundered down the stairs like a small avalanche in a smelting's cap, and the morning became loud and chaotic in the way mornings at Privet Drive always were, and Harry ate his single piece of toast standing at the counter and thought about nothing at all. The doorbell rang at 9:30. This was unusual. Saturdays at Privet Drive followed a rigid template, Vernon in front of the television, Petunia gossiping over the fence with the neighbors, Dudley breaking things. Visitors were rare and always announced in advance, because Petunia needed time to hide the evidence that a second child lived in the house. The doorbell rang again. Then a third time. Then it simply kept ringing, a continuous, insistent buzz that made the walls vibrate. Harry was in the garden on his knees, pulling weeds, when he heard Vernon bellow from inside the house. Then the front door opened, and Vernon's bellow cut off mid-syllable in a way Harry had never heard before, a strangled, choking sound, like a man who'd swallowed his own tongue. Harry stood up, wiping dirt on his jeans, and went around the side of the house to look. There were two figures standing on the doorstep. They were shorter than Harry, in fact, which was saying something, and they were not human. That much was immediately and viscerally obvious. Their skin was dark and rough, like old leather. Their fingers were long, their ears were pointed, and their eyes were black from edge to edge, like polished stones. They wore suits. Actual three-piece suits, immaculately tailored, with gold watch chains and cufflinks that glinted in the morning sun. One of them was holding a briefcase. The other was holding what appeared to be a very small, very sharp axe. Vernon Dursley stood in the doorway with his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Behind him, Petunia had gone the color of old milk. "Mr. Dursley," said the one with the briefcase. His voice was dry and precise, like the sound of a quill scratching parchment. "My name is Griphook. I am an account manager at Gringotts Wizarding Bank. This is my associate, Boneclaw, from our retrieval division. We are here regarding the accounts of one Harry James Potter, whom we believe resides at this address." Vernon made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was just a sound. "We have sent 17 owls over the past 3 years, Griphook continued, none of which have been answered. We have sent 4 formal notices via magical post. We have, as a final courtesy, sent a registered letter through your own Muggle postal system, which was returned unopened. Gringotts does not appreciate being ignored, Mr. Dursley. Gringotts does not, as a rule, come to its clients. That we are here should communicate to you the severity of our displeasure." "There is no one," Vernon started, his voice strangled. "Harry James Potter," Griphook said flatly. "Son of James Fleamont Potter and Lily Potter née Evans. Born July 31, 1980. Placed in your care by one Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore on the night of November 1, 1981. Do not waste my time with denials, Mr. Dursley. It is a Saturday, and I would rather not be here. I'm Harry." All 4 adults, 2 human, 2 decidedly not, turned to look at the boy standing at the corner of the house. Small, skinny, dirt on his knees and someone else's clothes hanging off his frame. Taped together glasses slightly crooked on his face. A scar, thin and jagged, visible beneath a mess of black hair. Griphook's black eyes fixed on him. Something moved behind them, surprise, Harry thought, or something colder. "Mr. Potter," Griphook said. He looked at Harry for a long moment, then looked at the house, then looked back at Harry. At the 2 large clothes. At the dirt. At the thinness of his wrists. Griphook turned to Vernon Dursley, and his expression didn't change at all, which was somehow worse than if it had. "Mr. Dursley. You are the magical guardian of the last heir of the most ancient and noble house of Potter. An heir whose accounts have shown no withdrawals for living expenses in 5 years. An heir who appears to be wearing rags and doing manual labor in your garden." He paused. "Gringotts takes the welfare of its account holders very seriously. Particularly account holders of Mr. Potter's financial significance. Now see here," Vernon blustered, some of his color returning. "I don't know what kind of freakish, Boneclaw," Griphook said. The goblin with the axe smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. There were too many teeth in it, and they were all very sharp. Vernon shut his mouth. "Mr. Potter," Griphook said, turning back to Harry. "I must ask you to accompany us to Gringotts. There are matters concerning your family's accounts that require your immediate attention. Irregularities have been detected, withdrawals that do not match your family's stated instructions, access by parties who should not have access, and certain, sealed records that are past their release date." He paused again. "You will not be returning to this house today." "Possibly not at all." Harry looked at Griphook. He looked at the axe-carrying goblin. He looked back at the Dursleys, at Vernon's purple face and Petunia's white one, and he felt the still place inside him hold perfectly steady. "All right," Harry said. Petunia made a noise. "You can't just, he's in our care, there are legal, goblin jurisdiction supersedes the Muggle legal system in matters of magical inheritance," Griphook said. "And your care, Mrs. Dursley, appears to have been somewhat lacking. Boneclaw, if you would." Boneclaw reached into the briefcase, his own, Harry realized, not Griphook's. Griphook was already walking toward the street, and withdrew a scroll of parchment so long it unrolled nearly to the ground. Notice of account review, notice of guardianship challenge, notice of potential criminal neglect under Section 47 of the Goblin Wizard Accords of 1743, and a receipt for Mr. Potter's personal effects, which we will be collecting. He thrust the scroll into Vernon's hands. "Have a lovely Saturday." Harry followed the goblins down the front walk of number 4, Privet Drive, and he did not look back. They traveled by a method Griphook called side-along apparition, which involved Boneclaw gripping Harry's arm with surprising strength and the world turning itself inside out like a sock. Harry stumbled when they arrived, his stomach lurching, but he didn't fall. They were standing in a narrow, cobbled alley behind what appeared to be a pub. London, Harry thought, from the noise and the smell of it. But the alley opened onto a street that wasn't on any map, a crooked, bustling, impossible street packed with people in robes and cloaks, with shop windows full of moving things and glowing things and things that defied easy description. Diagon Alley. Griphook said the name like it was beneath him. Harry barely had time to take it in before they were through the crowd and standing before a building that made everything else on the street look like a toy. Gringotts Wizarding Bank was white marble and bronze, towering and ancient, with columns that seemed to go up forever. Armored goblins flanked the entrance, carrying spears that gleamed with something more than polish. They bowed as Griphook passed. No, Harry realized with a start. They bowed as he passed. Griphook noticed his surprise and said nothing, but something like grim amusement flickered across his features. Inside, the bank was vast and echoing, a cathedral of stone and gold. Hundreds of goblins worked at high counters, weighing coins, examining gemstones, scratching away at enormous ledgers. Wizards and witches queued in lines, looking vaguely uncomfortable, the way people do in places where they know they are not in charge. Griphook led Harry past all of it, through a door at the back that required 3 separate keys and a drop of goblin blood to open, down a corridor of polished granite, and into a room that was clearly an office but felt more like a throne room. The desk was carved from a single block of obsidian. The chair behind it was occupied. The goblin in the chair was old. Old the way mountains are old, not frail, but settled, as if he'd been there so long he'd become part of the landscape. His eyes were sharp as cut glass, his hands folded on the desk before him, and when he looked at Harry, there was a weight to his gaze that made the air feel heavier. "Director Ragnarok," Griphook said, with a bow that was fractionally deeper than the ones Harry had seen at the door. "I present Harry James Potter." "Sit down, Mr. Potter," Ragnarok said. His voice was like gravel in a velvet bag. Harry sat. The chair was too big for him, his feet dangled above the floor. He didn't fidget. Ragnarok studied him for a long moment. "You are smaller than I expected." "I'm 6, Harry said. "Yes." Ragnarok's gaze lingered on the scar. "I know exactly what you are, Mr. Potter. Or rather, I know what the world believes you to be. The boy who lived. The vanquisher of the Dark Lord. A symbol." He said the last word the way someone might say, cockroach. But symbols are the concern of wizards. Gringotts deals in more tangible matters. Gold. Blood. Debt. And your accounts, Mr. Potter, are in considerable disarray. He opened a ledger on his desk, turning it so Harry could see. Harry couldn't read most of it, the script was cramped and the numbers were in a system he didn't recognize, but he could see the lines of red ink, slashing across entries like wounds. "Your parents left you a substantial fortune," Ragnarok said. The Potter family vault contains approximately 380,000 galleons in liquid assets, with additional holdings in property, investments, and magical artifacts. Your parents will specify that you were to be placed with your godfather, Sirius Black. Failing that, with any of 6 named magical families. The Dursleys were not mentioned. Harry felt the still place inside him ripple. Just slightly. My parents had a will. They did. It was sealed by order of the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, one Albus Dumbledore, on November 2, 1981. One day after your placement with the Dursleys. Ragnarok let that sit. Furthermore, since your placement, a sum of 750 galleons per month has been withdrawn from your trust vault by a party authorized by the same Albus Dumbledore. The stated purpose was your care and upkeep. Given what Griphook has reported about your living conditions, we have questions about where that gold has been going. Harry's hands were very still in his lap. Someone's been stealing from me. That is one interpretation. Gringotts prefers to establish facts before assigning terms like theft. But the irregularities are significant, and they are why we have pursued contacts so aggressively. Ragnarok closed the ledger. However, the financial matters, while serious, are not the primary reason I am meeting with you personally. Griphook. Griphook stepped forward and placed a shallow stone basin on the desk. It was old, really old, Harry could feel it, the same way he could sometimes feel the weather about to change. The stone was almost black, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. This is a bloodline basin, Ragnarok said. It is one of the oldest magical artifacts in Gringotts' possession, and it is used to trace lineage. All magical account holders undergo this test. You should have been tested at birth, but your parents were in hiding and the test was deferred. We will be conducting it now. What do I do? Give me your hand. Harry extended his hand across the desk. Ragnarok drew a thin silver knife. Harry didn't flinch, which Ragnarok noticed, and made a small cut across his palm. 3 drops of blood fell into the basin. The blood hit the stone and turned to gold. Harry blinked. Ragnarok went very still. Griphook made a sound that might have been a gasp, if goblins gasped, which Harry was fairly sure they didn't. The gold light in the basin pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and then it expanded, flowing up and out of the basin like liquid smoke. It hung in the air between them and resolved into lines, a family tree, Harry realized, written in light. He could read it, somehow, though it was in no language he'd ever seen. At the bottom, Harry James Potter. Above him, his parents, James and Lily. Above them, their parents, and their parents before them. The Potter line stretched back, generation after generation, the names growing older and stranger. But it didn't stop where a normal family tree would stop. It kept going, the golden light reaching further and further back, through centuries, through the Middle Ages, through the Dark Ages, until, the light changed color. It went from gold to white, a white so bright and fierce that Harry had to squint, and at the very top of the tree, burning like a star, was a single name. Arthur Pendragon. And beneath it, in letters that pulsed like a heartbeat, Soul Reborn. The once and future king. The prophecy fulfilled. The room was absolutely silent. Ragnarok was staring at the glowing tree with an expression Harry couldn't read. Not shock, exactly. Something deeper. Something that looked almost like fear, except that Harry didn't think Ragnarok was afraid of anything. Director? Griphook's voice was barely a whisper. Ragnarok stood. It was a slow, deliberate movement, and when he was on his feet, he was barely taller than when he'd been sitting, but somehow he seemed to fill the room. His black eyes were fixed on Harry, and they were burning. 1,500 years, Ragnarok said. Gringotts has waited 1,500 years. I don't understand, Harry said. No. You wouldn't. Not yet. Ragnarok came around the desk, moving with a purpose that made Griphook step back. Mr. Potter, Harry. What do you know about King Arthur? He pulled a sword from a stone, Harry said. It's a story. We learned about it in school. It is not a story. Ragnar's voice was iron. Arthur Pendragon was real. He was the greatest king the magical world has ever known, the only wizard to unite human and goblin kind under a single banner. When he fell at Camlin, he made a prophecy, that he would return when Britain's need was greatest. He entrusted his sword to the goblins for safekeeping, bound by a blood compact that has defined our nation for 15 centuries. He paused, and something raw and fierce moved behind his eyes. We have kept it. In the deepest vault of this bank, behind wards that make the defenses above look like parlor tricks. Waiting. The glowing family tree still hung in the air. Harry looked at it, at his name at the bottom and Arthur's name at the top, and the still place inside him wasn't still anymore. It was moving, like something waking up, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. You think I'm him, Harry said. You think I'm King Arthur. The basin does not think, Ragnar said. It knows. Blood magic of this caliber is beyond deception, beyond manipulation. No wizard alive could falsify a result from a bloodline basin. You are not merely a descendant of Arthur Pendragon, Harry. The basin identifies your soul. You are Arthur Pendragon, reborn. Harry sat in a too-large chair, 6 years old, with taped-together glasses and someone else's clothes and dirt still under his fingernails from the Dursleys' garden. He looked at the ancient goblin standing before him, and he felt something. Not a memory, exactly. More like an echo. A vibration in his chest, like a bell that had been struck a long time ago and was still, faintly, ringing. I want to see the sword, Harry said. Ragnar smiled. It was the first time Harry had seen a goblin smile without it being a threat, and it transformed his face entirely. Yes, he said. I imagine you do. The descent into the deep vaults of Gringotts took nearly an hour. They went by cart first, a shrieking, rattling, magnificent cart that plunged through tunnels of raw stone at speeds that should have been terrifying but instead made Harry feel, for the first time in his life, genuinely alive. Griphook drove with casual expertise, and Harry leaned into the turns with his eyes wide open and the wind tearing at his hair, and something inside him was laughing. The cart stopped at a platform Harry estimated was half a mile underground. The air was different here, heavier, older, and warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The walls of the tunnel were no longer rough stone but smooth, polished obsidian, and they were carved with the same shifting symbols Harry had seen on the bloodline basin, except these were enormous, covering every surface, pulsing faintly with light that had no visible source. Beyond this point, Ragnar said, he had come with them, which Griphook's expression suggested was unprecedented. We walk. The deep vaults do not permit mechanical transport. They are older than the bank, older than London, older than the civilization that built this tunnel. When Arthur entrusted the sword to our keeping, this place was already ancient. They walked. The tunnel sloped downward, gently but steadily, and the symbols on the walls grew denser and brighter. Harry could feel them, not just see them, feel them, a hum in his bones that grew stronger with every step. The still place inside him was wide open now, vibrating like a tuning fork, and with each step deeper into the earth, something was coming into focus. Not a memory. A presence. Harry, Ragnar said, without turning around. What do you feel? Like something's calling me, Harry said. Like it's been calling me for a long time and I just couldn't hear it until now. Ragnar nodded once and kept walking. They came to a door. It was not large or ornate. It was simple, heavy iron, set into the stone without hinges or handle. There were no visible locks. There was a single symbol carved into its center, a sword, pointing downward, with a crown above the hilt. Ragnar stopped. No goblin can open this door, he said. No wizard has ever tried, because no wizard has ever reached this place, the wards would have killed them long before now. They have not killed you. He looked at Harry. Put your hand on the door. Harry reached up. His hand was small against the dark iron, his fingers splayed, and when he touched the metal, the door knew him. That was the only way to describe it. The iron was warm, almost hot, and the moment his skin made contact, the carved sword blazed white and a sound filled the tunnel, low, resonant, like a cathedral bell rung once from very far away. The door didn't swing open. It dissolved, the iron turning to light, then to mist, then to nothing, revealing the space beyond. The vault was not what Harry expected. There was no gold. No treasure. It was a circular chamber, perhaps 30 feet across, with walls of raw, undressed stone that looked like they'd been here since the earth was formed. The ceiling was lost in shadow. The floor was bare except for a single object at its center. A stone. A rough, gray, unremarkable stone, about 3 feet tall, with a sword driven into it up to the crossguard. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at it, and the ringing inside him became a roar. The sword was beautiful. Not ornately so, it wasn't jeweled or gilded or any of the things Harry might have imagined. The blade was simple, straight, double-edged, made of a metal that seemed to glow faintly from within, like starlight trapped in steel. The crossguard was plain. The grip was wrapped in leather so old it should have been dust, but it looked as fresh as the day it was made. And from the blade, from the metal itself, came a light, steady, white gold, warm, that filled the chamber and made the shadows retreat to the far edges of the walls. Excalibur, Ragnox said, from behind him. His voice was rough. Caeldfulch. The sword of the king. It has been waiting, Harry. For you. Harry walked forward. His feet moved without conscious decision, carrying him across the bare stone floor toward the sword in the stone. He was aware, distantly, of Ragnox and Griphook watching from the doorway. He was aware of his own heartbeat, fast and hard in his thin chest. He was aware of Dudley's oversized clothes and his taped-together glasses and the scar on his forehead and the cut on his palm where Ragnox's knife had drawn blood. He was aware of all of it, and none of it mattered. He reached the stone. He looked at the sword. The light from the blade was so close now it seemed to come from inside his own skin, and the sound, the ringing, the calling, was so loud it drowned out everything else. And beneath it, within it, he could hear something. A voice. Not words, exactly, but meaning, clear and unmistakable. You know me. You have always known me. Take me up. Harry wrapped both hands around the grip. The leather was warm. It fit his hands perfectly, which was impossible. His hands were the hands of a 6-year-old, small and thin and still dirty from the garden, and the grip had been made for a grown man's fist. But it fit. As if the sword had reshaped itself, or as if his hands were more than they appeared to be. He pulled. There was no resistance. The sword slid from the stone like a key turning in a well-oiled lock, smooth and inevitable and right, and as the blade came free, the light that had been glowing steady erupted. It was, Harry had no frame of reference. It was like being at the center of a star. White gold light blasted outward from the blade in all directions, flooding the chamber, pouring into the tunnel beyond, and Harry felt it hit him like a wave, not painful, not gentle either, but immense, a force that picked him up from the inside and shook loose everything small and frightened and uncertain. Memories came. Not all at once, that would have destroyed him, but in fragments, in shards, like a stained glass window shattering and each piece carrying an image. A round table in a great hall. The smell of horse and heather and rain on stone. A battle on a green hill. A woman's face, beautiful and sad. A lance shattering. A man's laughter, deep and loyal and doomed. A sword, this sword, in his hand on 100 battlefields. The weight of a crown. The ache of betrayal. The cold of a lake, and a hand rising from the water, and a voice saying you will return. Harry stood in the chamber with Excalibur in his hands and tears running down his face and a king's memories rattling through him like thunder, and he was 6 years old and he was 1500 years old, and he was Harry and he was Arthur and he was something new, something that had never existed before, the union of both. The light subsided. Slowly. It pulled back into the blade, settling to that steady white gold glow, and the chamber was quiet again. Harry lowered the sword. His arms should have been shaking, the blade was nearly as long as he was tall, but they were steady. The sword weighed nothing in his hands. It weighed exactly what it should. He turned around. Ragnarok was on his knees. So was Griphook. The two most powerful goblins Harry had yet encountered were kneeling on the stone floor with their heads bowed, and when Ragnarok looked up, his black eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, if goblins wept. "The compact is fulfilled," Ragnarok said. His voice shook. 15 centuries, my king. We have kept faith. I know, Harry said, and he did know, in the way he now knew many things, not as facts learned, but as truths remembered. The goblins have been the most faithful of all. I will not forget it. I did not forget it then, and I will not forget it now. Ragnarok bowed his head again, and when he rose, the old goblin's spine was straighter than it had been, as if a weight had been lifted from him that he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. There is much to discuss, Ragnarok said. Yes, Harry agreed. He looked down at Excalibur in his hands, at the blade that glowed like captured starlight, and a fragment of memory surfaced, standing on a hilltop at dawn, looking out over a kingdom, knowing that the crown meant service, not privilege. He was 6. He was ancient. He was terrified and calm and alive in a way he hadn't known was possible. But first, Harry said, I need new clothes. If I'm going to deal with whatever's been happening with my accounts and my parents' will and whoever put me with the Dursleys, I'd rather not do it dressed like a scarecrow. Griphook made a sound that might have been a laugh. Ragnarok's mouth twitched. That, the director said, can be arranged. They returned to the surface. Harry carried Excalibur openly, and every goblin they passed stopped what they were doing and stared. Some of them bowed. Some of them simply stood frozen, eyes wide, as a 6-year-old boy in oversized clothes walked through the deepest corridors of Gringotts carrying the most famous sword in the history of the magical world. By the time they reached Ragnarok's office, the bank was in a state of controlled chaos. Goblins were running, actually running, through corridors, and Harry could hear raised voices in a harsh, guttural language he almost understood. Gobbledygook, his mind supplied, from a place that was Arthur rather than Harry. The language of the goblin nation. He'd spoken it once, long ago. Ragnarok shut the office door and the noise cut off like a switch. Silencing wards, Harry guessed. Sit, Ragnarok said. We have perhaps an hour before the wizarding world learns what has happened, and there is much you need to understand before then. Harry sat. Excalibur lay across his knees, still glowing faintly, warm through the fabric of his jeans. Ragnarok sat behind his desk and looked at Harry with an expression that had settled from awe into something more practical, the expression of a banker who had just witnessed a miracle and was now calculating its implications. What do you remember? Ragnarok asked. Harry considered this. The fragments were still settling, like snow in a shaken globe. Pieces, he said. Not everything. I remember feelings more than facts. I remember the table, the round table. I remember what it felt like to sit at the head of it. I remember battles, but not all of them, and the details are blurry. I remember faces. He paused. I remember Merlin. Ragnarok's expression sharpened. What do you remember of Merlin? He was, not what the stories say. Not a doddering old man. He was young when I knew him first. Young and brilliant and frightening. Harry frowned, reaching for details that slipped away like fish in dark water. He was my friend. He was the best friend I ever had. And he lied to me, at the end. About Mordred. About what was coming. He thought he was protecting me. Ragnarok was silent for a moment. Merlin's current incarnation, if he has one, is unknown to us. But Albus Dumbledore has long been suspected of, he stopped himself. No. That is speculation, and goblins do not speculate. Let us deal with facts. He opened a drawer and withdrew a thick sheaf of parchment. Your immediate situation is as follows. Legally, you are Harry James Potter, last heir of the most ancient and noble house of Potter, with an estimated net worth of 400,000 galleons in liquid assets and considerably more in property and holdings. The Potter seat on the Wisengamot has been vacant since your parents' death. Your magical guardian is, by current record, Albus Dumbledore, who placed you with the Dursleys in contravention of your parents' will. What does the Pendragon name give me? Ragnar's smile returned. It was sharp and fierce and full of teeth. Everything. The Pendragon title is the oldest in magical Britain. It predates the Ministry, the Wisengamot, and Hogwarts. It carries with it sovereign authority, dormant authority, unclaimed for 15 centuries, but never legally extinguished. The Pendragon seat on the Wisengamot is not merely a voting seat, Harry. It is the founding seat. The seat from which all other authority in magical Britain derives. Harry absorbed this. The Arthur part of him understood it instantly, the political implications, the power structure, the leverage. The Harry part of him was a 6-year-old boy who'd been sleeping in a cupboard that morning. The two perspectives overlaid each other, and what emerged was something clear-eyed and unflinching. So when I claimed that seat, Harry said, every person in magical Britain who holds power holds it because my predecessor allowed it. Precisely. That's going to make a lot of people very unhappy. It will make some people terrified, Ragnar corrected. And terrified people are dangerous, particularly when they have wands and political connections and a history of making problems disappear. He leaned forward. You are 6 years old, Harry. Even with Excalibur, even with the Pendragon name, there are those who will see you as a child to be controlled, manipulated, or eliminated. Albus Dumbledore will try the first two. Others will try the third. Then we move fast, Harry said. What do I need to claim the Pendragon title formally? The sword is your claim. Excalibur will accept no hand but that of the true Pendragon. Your lineage test confirms the blood and soul connection. Under Goblin law, the matter is settled. Under Wizarding law. Ragnar's expression soured. Under Wizarding law, there will be challenges, hearings, and attempts to bury the claim in bureaucracy. The Ministry will not simply accept that a 6-year-old child is the reincarnation of King Arthur. Then we don't start with the Ministry. Harry's mind was working, and it was working in ways it never had before, strategies, angles, leverage points, all surfacing from the deep well of Arthur's experience. We start with the public. The Daily Prophet. The story gets out before anyone can suppress it. Boy who lived revealed as Arthur Pendragon reborn, claims Excalibur from the deepest vault in Gringotts. By the time the Ministry tries to react, every witch and wizard in Britain will already know. Ragnar looked at him for a long moment. You are 6. I'm also 1,500. The two average out to something inconvenient for our enemies. This time, Ragnar actually laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound, but genuine. Arthur had the same quality. The ability to see the board clearly and move without hesitation. He straightened. Very well. Gringotts will release a formal statement confirming the lineage test and the claiming of Excalibur. We will also file immediate challenges to Dumbledore's guardianship and the sealing of your parents' will. The financial irregularities will be investigated. He paused. Where will you stay? You cannot return to the Dursleys. Is there a Potter property? Potter Manor. It has been sealed since your parents went into hiding, but the wards are still active. It is yours by right. Then I'll stay there. Under Goblin protection, if you'll provide it. The Pendragon Compact requires us to provide it. But I would have offered regardless. Ragnar stood. I will begin arrangements. Griphook will attend to your immediate needs, clothing, supplies, access to your vault. And Harry. The old goblin met his eyes. I was old when this century was young. I have seen dark lords rise and fall, governments crumble, and wars tear the magical world apart. Nothing, has surprised me the way you have today. You carry a heavy burden. The question of this age is whether you will carry it better than you did the last. Harry felt the weight of that, both as a child hearing a warning and as a king remembering a fall. Camlin. Mordred. The green hill and the dying and the sword thrown back to the Lady of the Lake. He had failed, last time. Not in the fighting, in the seeing. He hadn't seen Mordred's betrayal, hadn't seen Lancelot's weakness, hadn't seen the rot at the heart of his own court until it was far too late. I intend to, Harry said quietly. Ragnar nodded and left. Griphook was efficient to the point of ruthlessness. Within 30 minutes, Harry had been measured, fitted, and outfitted in clothes that actually fit, dark trousers, a white shirt, a jacket of deep green that somehow made his eyes look like they were lit from within. His glasses were replaced with new ones, properly fitted, the frames thin and dark. A goblin healer examined him, catalogued a depressing list of minor injuries, malnutrition indicators, and a magical parasite on his scar that made her hiss through her teeth and Griphook go dangerously quiet. What is that? Harry asked, pointing at the dark smudge the healer's diagnostic spell had revealed, hovering above the image of his scar. Soul magic, the healer said. Her name was Silverclaw, and she spoke with the clipped precision of someone who dealt in facts and considered emotions and inefficiency. A fragment of a soul, anchored to your scar. Not yours. Foreign. Dark. Harry felt Arthur's memories stir, knowledge of ancient, terrible magic. A Horcrux, he said. Silverclaw's eyes widened. Griphook grabbed the edge of the desk. You know what a Horcrux is, Silverclaw said carefully. I know what soul magic is. Arthur fought practitioners of it. Dark druids who split themselves to avoid death. The term is different, but the concept. The fragment of memory sharpened. Someone put a piece of their soul in my scar. Voldemort. The night he killed my parents. We can remove it, Silverclaw said. Goblin ritual magic can extract a soul fragment without harming the host. It is, not a pleasant process. Do it. Now. Is there a reason to wait? Silverclaw looked at Griphook. Griphook looked at the sword across Harry's knees, then at the boy holding it, and shook his head slowly. No, he said. There is not. It was not a pleasant process. That was a considerable understatement. It felt like someone had reached into Harry's forehead with red-hot pincers and was trying to pull something out that had grown roots. He sat in a stone chair in a ritual chamber deep in the bank, Excalibur across his knees, and gripped the arms of the chair until his knuckles went white while 3 goblin healers chanted in gobbledygook and silver fire burned across his scar. The fragment fought. Harry could feel it, a presence, oily and cold and furious, thrashing against the magic trying to dislodge it. It screamed. The sound wasn't audible, exactly, but Harry heard it in his bones, a shriek of pure malice that made his vision blur and his teeth ache. Excalibur flared. The white gold light blazed up from the blade, flooding the ritual circle, and where it touched the dark presence in his scar, the darkness burned. The fragment screamed again, louder, and then it tore free, a wisp of black smoke, writhing and howling, that the goblin healers caught in a crystal flask and sealed with a word that sounded like a door slamming shut. Harry slumped in the chair, breathing hard. His scar throbbed. But for the first time in his memory, his Harry memories, the ones that started in a cupboard under the stairs, his head felt clear. As if a noise he'd been hearing for so long he'd stopped noticing it had suddenly stopped. It's gone, he said. Silverclaw examined him again, her diagnostic spell throwing up images that were notably cleaner than before. The fragment has been fully extracted. Your scar will remain, the physical damage is too old to reverse without specialized treatment, but the foreign soul presence has been eliminated. She held up the crystal flask. The black smoke inside thrashed against the glass. What would you like done with this? Harry looked at the fragment of Voldemort's soul, trapped in crystal, and felt nothing but cold resolve. Destroy it. With pleasure, Silverclaw said, and the look on her face suggested she meant it literally. By the time Harry left the ritual chamber, it was late afternoon. He'd been in Gringotts for nearly 7 hours, and in that time, his life had been dismantled and rebuilt from the foundations up. He was no longer the boy who lived, the neglected orphan, the boy in the cupboard. He was Harry James Potter Pendragon, heir to 2 ancient houses, wielder of Excalibur, the reincarnation of the once and future king, and he was walking through the lobby of the most secure magical institution in Britain with a legendary sword at his hip and a small army of goblins at his back. Ragnarok met him at the main doors. The statement has been released to the Daily Prophet, Ragnarok said. It will be on the front page of tomorrow's edition. I have also filed formal challenges with the Wizengamot regarding your guardianship, the sealing of the Potter will, and the financial irregularities. Potter Manor is being opened and prepared. A team of goblin guards will be stationed there permanently. How long before Dumbledore shows up? Ragnarok glanced toward the front doors of the bank. Based on the speed at which bad news travels in the wizarding world, I would estimate he is already here. Harry followed his gaze. Through the great bronze doors of Gringotts, he could see the marble steps leading down to Diagon Alley, and at the bottom of those steps, a crowd was gathering. Witches and wizards, pointing and whispering, held back by armored goblin guards. And climbing the steps, moving through the crowd like a ship through water, was a tall, thin figure in sweeping purple robes, with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles and an expression of deep, urgent concern. Albus Dumbledore. Harry watched him approach. He could feel Arthur's memories stirring again, not about Dumbledore specifically, but about the type. The powerful advisor, the wise counselor, the man who always knew best and was so certain of his own righteousness that he couldn't conceive of being wrong. Arthur had known men like that. Some of them had served him well. Some of them had led him to ruin. Harry, my boy, Dumbledore called as he reached the top of the steps. His voice was warm, grandfatherly, rich with carefully calibrated concern. I came as soon as I heard. Are you all right? When I learned you'd been taken from the Dursleys, taken. Harry said the word like he was testing its weight. He stood at the top of the Gringotts steps in his new clothes with Excalibur at his hip, and he looked up at the most powerful wizard in Britain, and he did not look away. That's an interesting word for it. I might have used rescued. Or retrieved. Since my parents will apparently specified 6 different families who should have taken me in, and you sealed that will and put me in a cupboard under the stairs instead. Dumbledore's expression flickered. Just for an instant, something moved behind the grandfatherly mask, surprise, maybe, or a quick reassessment. Then the warmth was back, the concern, the twinkling eyes. My dear boy, I understand this must be very confusing. The protections at your aunt's house were vital. Your mother's sacrifice created a blood ward that required me to call that place home, Harry finished. Yes. I know what blood wards are. The question isn't whether they worked, Professor Dumbledore. The question is whether you had the right to place me there at all, given that my parents explicitly chose otherwise. The question is what happened to 750 galleons a month that was supposed to pay for my care but apparently went somewhere else entirely. The question is why the chief warlock of the Wizengamot sealed a legal will and appointed himself guardian of an orphan without so much as a hearing. The crowd at the bottom of the steps had gone very quiet. Dumbledore's eyes were no longer twinkling. These are serious allegations, Harry, he said carefully. And there are explanations for all of them. But perhaps this isn't the best place. I think it's exactly the right place, Harry said. Gringotts has confirmed my identity, Professor. I am Harry James Potter, and I am also the magical reincarnation of Arthur Pendragon. The lineage test was performed by Director Ragnarok himself. Excalibur accepted me. The Pendragon compact with the goblin nation is fulfilled. He let that sink in, watching Dumbledore's face with eyes that were far too old for a 6-year-old's. I'm not going back to the Dursleys. I'm not going anywhere you choose for me. I am going to Potter Manor, under goblin protection, and tomorrow, when the Daily Prophet hits every doorstep in magical Britain, the whole world is going to know exactly what happened here today. Dumbledore looked at him. Really looked, for the first time, and Harry saw the old wizard's eyes widen, not at the words, but at what was behind them. At the steel. At the absolute, unshakable certainty of someone who had been a king once and remembered, on some deep and fundamental level, what it meant to rule. Harry, Dumbledore said quietly. You are 6 years old. I know exactly how old I am, Professor. I also know exactly who I am. Do you? The question hung in the air. The crowd murmured. The goblin guards stood like statues, their spear points catching the late afternoon sun. Ragnarok stood at Harry's shoulder, silent and watchful, and said nothing at all. Dumbledore studied Harry for a long, long moment. Then something in his expression shifted, not defeat, not anger, but a kind of recognition. The look of a chess master who has just discovered that one of his pawns is, in fact, a queen. We will speak again, Dumbledore said. We will, Harry agreed. On my terms. Dumbledore inclined his head, barely, but he did it, and turned and walked back down the steps. The crowd parted for him. He did not look back. Harry let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were shaking, just slightly. Not from fear. From adrenaline, from the sheer enormity of what had just happened, from the collision of a 6-year-old's terror and a king's unbreakable will. He clenched his fists until the shaking stopped. That went well, Griphook observed dryly. It went as it needed to go, Ragnarok said. Come, Harry. Potter Manor awaits, and you have had a very long day. Harry turned from the steps of Gringotts and walked back into the bank, and as he crossed the threshold, a gust of wind caught the great bronze doors and swung them wide, and for just a moment, the late afternoon sun poured through and caught the blade of Excalibur at his hip, and the sword blazed like a beacon, visible to every witch and wizard in Diagon Alley. They saw it. All of them. A small boy with a scar on his forehead and a legendary sword at his side, silhouetted in the doorway of the Goblin Bank, and behind him, the Goblin Nation, rising from 15 centuries of waiting. Tomorrow, the newspapers would scream. Tomorrow, the ministry would scramble. Tomorrow, Albus Dumbledore would sit in his office and begin redrawing every plan he'd ever made. Tomorrow, in a dozen dark houses across Britain, men and women with dark marks on their arms would read the headline and feel something they hadn't felt in years, fear. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Harry James Potter Pendragon, 6 years old, the boy who lived, the once and future king, went home for the first time. Potter Manor rose from the English countryside like something out of a dream that Arthur's memory recognized as kin to places long since crumbled to dust. It wasn't a castle, not quite, but it was ancient and proud, built of grey stone with climbing ivy and tall windows that caught the last light of the setting sun. The wards shimmered faintly as Harry approached, and then they sang, a clear, bright note of recognition, and the great front doors swung open of their own accord. Inside, it smelled like old wood and magic. Dust sheets covered the furniture, and the portraits on the walls were sleeping, but as Harry walked through the entrance hall, they stirred. Eyes opened. Painted figures turned in their frames to look at the boy walking through their home, and one by one, they began to whisper. Is that, the Potter boy? He has the sword. Good God, he has the sword, James's son. Lily's boy. And he, look at him. Look at his eyes. Harry stopped in the middle of the hall. Excalibur's glow cast soft light across the stone floor, across the dust sheets and the sleeping house, and he felt, for the first time in his life, like he was standing where he was supposed to be. Welcome home, Mr. Potter, said a voice, and a small figure materialized in front of him, a house elf, ancient and dignified, wearing a clean pillowcase emblazoned with the Potter crest. I is being Mipsy. I is keeping the manor for you, sir, all these years. I is knowing you would come. Harry knelt, which put him at eye level with the elf. Thank you, Mipsy. For keeping it safe. Mipsy's enormous eyes filled with tears. You is being just like your father, sir. And, she peered at him, her head tilted. And something more. Something old. Yes, Harry said. Something old. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the grounds of Potter Manor stretched away into the gathering dusk, gardens gone wild, a lake glinting silver, and beyond it, the dark mass of an English forest. His home. His family's home. And now, the seat of whatever came next. Harry touched the hilt of Excalibur and felt it pulse warmly under his palm, steady as a heartbeat, patient as stone. The once and future king, the prophecy said. He was once. He would be future. But right more actions continue. Chapter 2, the round table. The dream came, as it always did, with the smell of rain on stone. Harry stood on the battlements of a castle that no longer existed, looking out over a green land that stretched to the horizon. He could feel the wind on his face, cold and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke and wet earth. Below him, in the courtyard, men were training, the ring of steel on steel, the shouts of sergeants, the thunder of hooves on packed dirt. His men. His knights. He knew this place. Camelot. Not the gleaming fairy tale version from children's books, but the real thing, rougher, louder, more alive. The stone walls were stained with weather and age. The banners snapped in the wind, red and gold, bearing the Pendragon dragon. And beside him on the battlements, "You're brooding again." The voice was light, amused, with an undercurrent of something sharper. A young man leaned against the parapet, dark-haired, thin-faced, with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone who looked barely 20. "You always stand up here when you're brooding. It's very dramatic. The men love it." "I'm not brooding," Arthur said. "I'm thinking. When you do it up here with the wind in your hair, it's brooding. When you do it in the war room with a map, it's thinking. I've explained this." Arthur, Harry, felt a smile pull at his mouth. "Merlin. Your Majesty. Shut up." Merlin grinned, and the dream shifted, the colors bleeding, the sound fading, the castle dissolving like mist. Harry reached for it, trying to hold on, but the dream was already gone, and he was lying in a bed in Potter Manor with pale morning light streaming through the windows and the fading echo of Merlin's laughter in his ears. Harry lay still for a moment, letting the memory settle. They came every night now, fragments of Arthur's life, playing out in dreams that were more vivid than any film and more real than most of his waking hours. Sometimes they were battles, the crash of shield walls, the screaming of horses, the terrible clarity of combat where every movement was life or death. Sometimes they were quieter, council meetings, diplomatic negotiations, long rides through the countryside with a retinue of knights. And sometimes, the ones that shook him most, they were personal. Arthur laughing with Merlin. Arthur arguing with Guinevere. Arthur sitting alone in a dark room after Lancelot's betrayal, the silence so heavy it had a sound of its own. Harry was 7 now. A year had passed since Gringotts, since the bloodline basin and the deep vault and the moment his hands closed around Excalibur's grip. A year of dreams and memories and the slow, sometimes painful process of becoming whoever he was supposed to be. He swung his legs out of bed and crossed to the window. Potter Manor's grounds were sharp in the early light, the gardens that Mipsy had spent the past year coaxing back to life, the lake glittering cold and bright, the forest beyond it standing dark and silent. 2 goblin guards were visible on the perimeter, their armor catching the sun. Ragnarok had been true to his word, the protection detail was permanent, professional, and armed to the teeth. Harry dressed quickly, he'd grown 2 inches since arriving at the manor, and Mipsy had to adjust his clothes every few weeks, clicking her tongue about young masters who won't stop getting taller, and went downstairs. The kitchen was warm. Mipsy had breakfast ready, eggs, toast, bacon, porridge, fruit, and a pot of tea that could have fueled a small army. Harry had long since stopped arguing about the quantity. After years of the Dursleys' starvation rations, Mipsy had made it her personal mission to put weight on him, and she pursued this goal with a ferocity that would have impressed a Goblin War commander. "Master Harry is having lessons with Griphook at 9, Mipsy reminded him as he sat down. "Magical theory or politics?" "Both," Mipsy is thinking. "Griphook is bringing documents about the Wisengamot session." Harry nodded, biting into toast. The Wisengamot. The governing body of magical Britain, a combination of Parliament, Supreme Court, and Old Boys Club, made up of hereditary seats and appointed members. Harry held 2 seats, Potter and Pendragon, both currently administered by Ragnarok as his proxy, since a 7-year-old couldn't physically sit in the chamber. But his voice was heard. His positions were known. And for the past year, that voice had been systematically dismantling the comfortable assumptions of magical Britain's ruling class. The guardianship challenge had been first. It had taken 3 months, for hearings, and the combined legal firepower of Gringotts' contract division, but Dumbledore's guardianship had been formally revoked. The old wizard had fought it, not openly, not aggressively, but with the quiet, persistent maneuvering of a man who believed absolutely in his own judgment. He'd argued blood wards. He'd argued security. He'd argued, with a straight face, that the Dursleys provided a loving home environment. That argument had died a messy death when Gringotts presented the healer's report from Harry's first examination, the malnutrition, the untreated injuries, the soul fragment embedded in his forehead, to a packed Wisengamot chamber. The silence that followed had been deafening. Dumbledore's face had gone very pale, and for just a moment, the twinkle in his eyes had gone out entirely. Harry's guardianship had been transferred to Gringotts, an unprecedented arrangement, and one that had required Ragnarok to invoke 3 separate clauses of the Goblin Wizard Accords, but it was done. Harry was, legally, in the care of the Goblin Nation, with all the protections that implied. The financial investigation had been messier. The 750 galleons per month had been traced to a Dumbledore-controlled discretionary fund used for Order of the Phoenix operations. The Order, as Harry had learned, was Dumbledore's private anti-Voldemort militia, and its funding came from a patchwork of donations, bequests, and, it now appeared, the trust vault of an orphan child. Dumbledore's defense had been that the funds were being used to protect Harry and maintain the war effort against Voldemort's remaining supporters. The Wisengamot had ordered repayment in full, plus interest, plus a formal censure of the Chief Warlock. Dumbledore was still Chief Warlock. Still Headmaster of Hogwarts. Still, by most measures, the most powerful individual in magical Britain. But his reputation had taken damage, and the careful, grandfatherly image he'd cultivated for decades now had cracks in it that anyone who looked closely could see. Harry finished breakfast, collected Excalibur from its place by the door. He never went far without it. It wasn't paranoia, it was the bone-deep instinct of a warrior who knew that the moment you set your weapon down was the moment someone tried to kill you, and walked to the study. The study had been his father's. Harry knew this because the portraits told him, eagerly and at length, about James Potter's habit of sprawling across the leather sofa with a Quidditch magazine and a butterbeer. The room still held traces of him, a Gryffindor scarf draped over a chair, a framed photograph of the Marauders on the desk, a pair of Quidditch goggles hanging from a hook by the window. Harry hadn't moved any of it. He liked knowing his father had been here. It made the house feel less like a monument and more like a home. Griphook arrived precisely at 9. The Goblin had become, over the past year, something between a tutor, an advisor, and, though neither of them would have used the word, a friend. He was sharp, dry, impatient with stupidity, and utterly ruthless in his teaching methods, which suited Harry perfectly. "The Wisengamot session is in 3 days, Griphook said without preamble, spreading documents across the desk. "Lucius Malfoy has tabled a motion." Harry picked up the first document. "What kind of motion?" "A formal challenge to the Pendragon claim. He's been building to this for months, you know that." He's assembled a coalition of 12 hereditary seats, all aligned with the traditionalist pureblood faction. Their argument is that reincarnation claims are unprovable by existing magical jurisprudence and that the bloodline basin is a goblin artifact of unverified reliability. Harry read through the motion, his eyes moving quickly. Arthur's memories provided the political instinct, a year of Griphook's tutoring provided the legal knowledge. He's not trying to win, Harry said. Not outright. He can't, the evidence is too strong. He's trying to create doubt. To establish a precedent that the claim can be challenged, so that every time I exercise the Pendragon authority, someone can point to this motion and say it's contested. Precisely. Griphook looked pleased, which he expressed by becoming marginally less dour. Malfoy is intelligent. More so than most wizards I've dealt with, and I've dealt with thousands. He won't make the mistake of attacking you directly, not after the guardianship hearings. He'll attack the framework. Undermine the legitimacy of the tools used to verify your claim, and by extension, undermine the claim itself. Who's on the tribunal? The challenge will be heard by a panel of 5. Dumbledore chairs, as Chief Warlock. Amelia Bones has claimed a seat, citing DMLE interest in the legal precedent. Tiberius Ogden and Griselda Marchbanks have been appointed as neutral members. And Malfoy has pushed for Cornelius Fudge as the 5th. Fudge. Harry set down the document. The Minister for Magic. Who owes his position to Malfoy's gold and is, by all accounts, a man whose spine was removed at birth and replaced with a weather vane. Griphook's lip curled. He will vote however Malfoy tells him to vote. So the real battleground is Ogden and Marchbanks. Yes. Bones is already on our side, she's seen the evidence and, more importantly, she's a woman of principle, which makes her a rare creature in the Wizengamot. Dumbledore is. Dumbledore. He won't vote against the evidence, but he won't be enthusiastic about confirming a claim that gives a 7-year-old more political authority than he has. Harry leaned back in his chair, turning the situation over in his mind. The Arthur part of him recognized the pattern. It was courtly politics, the same game that had been played around the Round Table, where every lord had his faction and every alliance had its price. The specifics changed. The human nature behind them never did. I want to speak, Harry said. Griphook's eyebrows rose. At the tribunal? You've been represented by proxy at every session so far. That's the problem. They've never seen me. They've seen Ragnarok speaking on my behalf, which lets them frame this as a goblin power play. If I walk into that chamber myself, with Excalibur, and address the tribunal directly, he paused, thinking. They can challenge a proxy. They can challenge a document. They can't challenge a 7-year-old boy looking them in the eye and speaking with the weight of 1,500 years behind him. You would be the youngest person to address the Wizengamot in its history. Good. That makes it a better story. Griphook studied him. You understand what you're doing. This isn't just a legal proceeding. It's theater. You're not just trying to win the vote, you're trying to win the narrative. The public story of who you are and what you represent. I learned from a master, Harry said, and for a moment, he wasn't talking about Griphook. He was remembering Merlin, who had understood the power of stories better than anyone who ever lived, who had known that a king's authority rested not just on his sword but on the tale people told about him. Arthur won Britain not by conquering it, but by making people want to follow him. The sword got their attention. The Round Table got their loyalty. The story held it all together. And what's your story? Harry smiled. It was a strange expression on a 7-year-old's face, warm but sharp, the smile of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The Orphan King. The boy who was thrown away by the people who were supposed to protect him and rose anyway. Everyone loves an underdog, Griphook. Even wizards. They spent the next 3 hours preparing. Harry read every legal document Griphook put in front of him. He studied the members of the tribunal, their histories, their voting records, their known allegiances and prejudices. He drafted his remarks, discarded them, drafted them again, and finally settled on an approach that was simple, direct, and devastatingly personal. He was in the middle of reviewing precedents for lineage claims when Mipsy appeared with a pop. "Master Harry, sir. You is having visitors. A lady and a young gentleman is being at the gate." Harry looked up. "Who?" "She is saying she is Augusta Longbottom, sir. And her grandson Neville." Harry glanced at Griphook, who provided context with characteristic efficiency. "Augusta Longbottom. Regent of the most ancient and noble house of Longbottom. Formidable woman. Old guard conservative, but principled, not Malfoy's faction. Her son Frank and his wife Alice were Aurors. They were tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange after the war. The boy, Neville, is their son. Same age as you." Harry absorbed this. "Longbottom was one of the families named in my parents' will. It was third on the list, after Sirius Black and the Bones family." Something in Harry's chest tightened. A family that should have taken him in, if things had been different. Parents who'd been destroyed by the same war that killed his own. A boy his age who'd grown up without his mother and father, just like him. "Let them in," Harry said. Augusta Longbottom was exactly as formidable as Griphook had suggested. She was tall, sharp-eyed, and wore a hat that appeared to have a stuffed vulture on it, which should have been ridiculous but somehow wasn't, because Augusta Longbottom wore it with the absolute confidence of a woman who did not give a single damn what anyone thought of her millinery choices. Her grandson was a different story. Neville Longbottom was round-faced, slightly pudgy, and clearly terrified. He stood half behind his grandmother in the entrance hall of Potter Manor, clutching a toad, an actual toad, to his chest and staring at Harry with wide, anxious eyes. He was wearing formal robes that were slightly too large for him, and his hair looked like it had been combed aggressively and was already staging a rebellion. "Mr. Potter," Augusta said. Her voice was crisp and precise, like someone who had never wasted a syllable in her life. "Thank you for receiving us. I apologize for the lack of notice. I've been meaning to call for some time, but I wanted to be certain of my ground before I did." "Certain of your ground?" Harry asked. Augusta's gaze was direct. "I wanted to know if the Pendragon claim was genuine before I associated my house with yours. I've now reviewed the Gringotts evidence, spoken with 3 independent cursebreakers about the bloodline basin's reliability, and read every historical text on Arthur Pendragon in my family's library. I'm satisfied." She paused. "I also wanted you to know that when your parents' will was sealed, I petitioned 3 times to take custody of you. I was refused each time by Dumbledore personally. The entrance hall was very quiet." "I didn't know that," Harry said. "No. You wouldn't have. The petitions were filed under seal." Augusta's jaw tightened. "I knew your parents, Mr. Potter. James and Lily were fine people. Frank and Alice, my son and his wife, they were close friends. We were at war together. When I learned where Dumbledore had placed you." She stopped, and for just a moment, the iron composure cracked and something raw showed through. "I should have fought harder." "You fought," Harry said. "That matters." Augusta looked at him, really looked, and something shifted in her expression. The assessment was over. Whatever she'd come to determine, she'd determined it. "Neville," she said, without turning around. "Come here and introduce yourself. And for heaven's sake, stop hiding behind me. You're a Longbottom." Neville shuffled forward. The toad in his hands let out a disconsolate croak. Hello," he said. "I'm Neville. Longbottom. Obviously." He winced. "Sorry. I'm not very good at this." Harry grinned. He couldn't help it. There was something about Neville's earnest, awkward misery that cut straight through the accumulated weight of politics and ancient memories and landed somewhere genuinely, refreshingly human. "I'm Harry. Do you want to see the grounds? There's a lake." Neville blinked. He'd clearly been expecting something other than a normal invitation from a normal kid. "You, really? Really? I've been reading legal documents all morning, and if I read one more I'm going to use Excalibur as a letter opener. Come on." He led Neville out through the manor's back doors and into the gardens, leaving Augusta in the entrance hall with Griphook, who would, Harry knew, be assessing her political value with the subtlety of a surgeon and the mercy of a shark. Outside, the afternoon was bright and mild. Late spring, the gardens coming alive, the lake glinting under a pale blue sky. Harry walked at a pace that let Neville fall into step beside him without having to hurry, and for a few minutes, neither of them spoke. It was Neville who broke the silence. "Is it true? About King Arthur?" "Yeah. And the sword?" Harry drew Excalibur. He did it casually, the way he might have pulled a book off a shelf, and held it up so the blade caught the light. The white gold glow was soft in the sunlight, barely visible, but Neville's eyes went round. "Blimey," Neville said. "It's lighter than it looks," Harry said. He flipped it once, caught it, and slid it back into the scabbard at his hip. The scabbard was new, goblin-made, dark leather and silver, sized for a child's frame. He'd go through several more before he stopped growing. "So what's the toad's name?" "Trevor." Neville looked down at the toad, flushing. "He's not very impressive, I know. Gran says a toad's an odd pet for a wizard, but he was a gift from my great-uncle Algy and I can't very well get rid of him." "I like toads," Harry said, which wasn't exactly true but also wasn't exactly false, and Neville gave him a tentative smile that transformed his whole face. They walked down to the lake. Harry skimmed stones. Arthur had been good at it, apparently, and the muscle memory had carried over, while Neville sat on the bank and let Trevor explore the mud. They talked about nothing important at first: favorite foods, whether dragons were real. They were, Neville informed him solemnly. His uncle had a friend who worked with them in Romania, what Hogwarts would be like when they were old enough to go. Then Neville went quiet for a while, and when he spoke again, his voice was different. "Smaller. My parents are in St. Mungo's. The wizarding hospital. They were, people hurt them. With magic. After the war." He stroked Trevor's back with one finger. "They don't recognize me. I visit every month and they don't know who I am. Mum gives me sweet wrappers. She always gives me sweet wrappers." Harry sat down on the bank beside him. "I'm sorry." "It's okay. I mean, it's not. But I'm used to it." Neville's jaw set in a way that was, Harry realized, a mirror of his grandmother's. "Stubborn. Enduring. Gran says I should be more like Dad. Braver. She doesn't say it to be mean, she misses him. The way he was." "You're here," Harry said. Neville looked at him, confused. "Your grandmother told you she was taking you to meet someone the whole wizarding world is talking about. A kid who claims to be King Arthur reborn, who carries a magic sword, who just publicly humiliated Dumbledore. You had no idea what to expect. And you came anyway." Harry met Neville's eyes. "That's not nothing, Neville." Neville stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked away, but not before Harry saw something in his expression shift, a small, fragile thing, like a seed cracking open. "Thanks," Neville said quietly. "We should be friends," Harry said, because Arthur had learned the hard way that the most important thing was to say the true thing directly, without games or manipulation. "I don't have any friends, I mean. The goblins are allies, but it's not the same. And I think you might be good at it." "At being friends?" "Yeah." Neville considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old being offered something precious. Then he nodded. "Okay. Yeah. I'd like that. Harry stuck out his hand. Neville shifted Trevor to one arm and shook it, and the handshake turned into a grin on both their faces, and it was, for a moment, in the sunlight by the lake, exactly as simple as it should have been. Augusta Longbottom stayed for 2 hours. By the time she left, she and Griphook had established a preliminary political alliance between the houses of Longbottom and Potter Pendragon, and Neville had extracted a promise that Harry would come to Longbottom Hall the following week. Augusta shook Harry's hand at the gate with a grip like a steel trap and told him, with devastating sincerity, that his mother would have been proud. Harry carried that with him the rest of the day, a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with magic. The Wizengamot tribunal was held 3 days later, in the cavernous chamber beneath the Ministry of Magic. Harry had been to the ministry once before, for the guardianship hearings, but he'd gone through a private entrance and hadn't seen much. This time, Ragnarok had insisted they use the main entrance. The atrium. Maximum visibility. The atrium of the Ministry of Magic was a vast, echoing space of dark stone and green flame, with a fountain in its center and fireplaces lining the walls that flared to life as witches and wizards arrived by Floo. Harry walked through it with Ragnarok on one side and Griphook on the other, Excalibur at his hip, and every head in the atrium turned. The whispers started immediately and followed him like a wave. That's him, that's Potter, look at the sword, is that really Excalibur, he's so young, Merlin's beard, and Harry let them wash over him without breaking stride. Arthur had walked through 100 hostile courts. Harry had survived the Dursleys. A few whispers were nothing. The Wizengamot chamber was arranged in concentric semicircles, the seats rising like a Roman amphitheater around a central floor. The 5 members of the tribunal sat at an elevated bench at the front, Dumbledore in the center, Amelia Bones to his left, Fudge to his right, and Ogden and Marchbanks on the wings. The public gallery was packed. The press box was overflowing. Rita Skeeter, the Daily Prophet's most notorious journalist, was practically vibrating with anticipation, her acid-green quick-quotes quill already scribbling. Lucius Malfoy sat in the front row of the hereditary seats. He was elegant, silver-haired, immaculate in black robes with a silver serpent-head cane resting against his knee. He watched Harry enter the chamber with pale grey eyes that gave nothing away. Harry walked to the petitioner's podium at the center of the floor. It was tall, built for adults, and he'd had Griphook arrange for a step to be placed behind it. The step was goblin-crafted, obsidian and silver, and when Harry climbed it and placed his hands on the podium, his head and shoulders were visible to the entire chamber. Excalibur's glow pulsed faintly at his hip. The chamber went quiet. "This tribunal is convened," Dumbledore said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space, "to hear a formal challenge to the lineage claim of Harry James Potter, styled Potter Pendragon, specifically the claim of reincarnation from Arthur Pendragon and the associated rights and titles of the Pendragon line. The challenge has been brought by Lord Lucius Malfoy on behalf of a coalition of 12 hereditary seats. Lord Malfoy, you may present your case." Malfoy rose with fluid grace. He was, Harry had to admit, very good at this. His voice was smooth, measured, and dripping with reasonableness. He didn't attack Harry. He didn't attack the goblins. He simply raised concerns. Thoughtful concerns. Legitimate concerns. About the reliability of goblin magical artifacts in determining wizarding claims. About the legal precedent of accepting reincarnation as a basis for inheritance. About the potential for fraud, not that he was accusing anyone, of course, but the potential must be considered, for the integrity of the Wizengamot itself. It was masterful. Every word was calibrated to sound fair, balanced, and deeply concerned with the proper function of magical law. And underneath it all, the message was clear: this boy is a puppet of the goblins, the claim is a power grab, and if you accept it, you're handing control of the Wizengamot to a child and his non-human handlers. Harry listened without expression. Ragnarok, seated behind him in the gallery, was equally still. Griphook's jaw was tight. Malfoy finished. Dumbledore nodded. "Mr. Potter Pendragon." You may respond. Harry looked out at the chamber. Hundreds of faces looked back at him. Skeptical. Curious. Hostile. Sympathetic. Afraid. He could see it all, read it all, the way Arthur had read the faces of his court. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that the prepared remarks in his pocket were wrong. Too careful. Too legal. Too much like what a 7-year-old who'd been coached by goblins would say. He left them in his pocket. Lord Malfoy is right, Harry said. The chamber stirred. Malfoy's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, surprise, quickly controlled. He's right that this claim is extraordinary, Harry continued. He's right that the Wisengamot should examine it carefully. He's right that reincarnation is not a normal basis for inheritance, and that the precedent this sets matters enormously. He paused. Where Lord Malfoy is wrong, respectfully, is in suggesting that the evidence is insufficient. And where he is dishonest is in pretending that this challenge is about legal principle rather than political power. Malfoy's face went very still. The chamber was dead silent. Let's talk about evidence, Harry said. The bloodline basin is not a goblin toy or a fortune-teller's crystal ball. It is one of the oldest magical artifacts in the world, created before the founding of Hogwarts, before the establishment of the Ministry, and it has been used to verify every significant lineage claim in magical Britain for over 1,000 years. Lord Malfoy's own family has relied on basin testing to establish its claims. Lord Knott's. Lord Parkinson's. Every family in the coalition challenging my claim today has, at some point, used the same artifact they now call unreliable. He looked at Malfoy. Unless Lord Malfoy is prepared to invalidate his own lineage verification, I suggest he find a different argument. Movement in the gallery. Whispers. Skeeter's quill was a blur. But evidence isn't really what this is about, is it? Harry said. He stepped down from behind the podium. The step had served its purpose, getting him seen, but now he wanted to move, to speak directly, without a barrier between him and the chamber. He walked to the center of the floor with Excalibur at his hip, a small figure in a vast room, and every eye followed him. The Pendragon seat is the founding seat of this body. It carries authority that predates every other seat in this chamber, including Lord Malfoy's. If my claim is confirmed, the political landscape of magical Britain shifts. Alliances that have held for decades become uncertain. Power that certain families have accumulated becomes less absolute. That is what Lord Malfoy is afraid of. Not that my claim is false, but that it's true. I object to the characterization, Malfoy began. Let the boy speak, Amelia Bones said sharply. She was a broad, square-jawed woman with a monocle and an expression that suggested she suffered fools with the enthusiasm of a cat suffering a bath. Harry turned to the tribunal. Madam Bones. Professor Dumbledore. Members of the tribunal. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be the reincarnation of Arthur Pendragon. I didn't ask for Excalibur. I didn't ask to be orphaned, or placed with muggles who locked me in a cupboard, or to have a piece of Voldemort's soul stuck in my forehead for 5 years. The chamber flinched at the name. Harry didn't pause. But these things happened. And I am here, not because goblins put me here, but because a bloodline basin confirmed what is true, and a sword that has waited 1,500 years for the right hand recognized mine. He drew Excalibur. The blade sang as it cleared the scabbard, and the white gold light blazed in the dim chamber, and several people in the gallery gasped. Harry held it up, not as a threat, but as proof. The light was steady, warm, unmistakable. This is Excalibur. It is real. I am real. And you can debate the legal precedent until the sun burns out, but you cannot change what is. He looked at Malfoy. At Dumbledore. At Fudge, who was perspiring heavily. I am not asking this tribunal to make me king, Harry said. I am asking it to confirm what the oldest magic in this country has already confirmed. I am the heir of Arthur Pendragon. I carry his sword in his name. And I intend to use both in service of a magical Britain that is better than the one we have, more just, more honest, more worthy of the legacy we all claim to carry. He sheathed the sword. The light faded. The chamber was absolutely silent. Then Griselda Marchbanks, who was approximately 400 years old and had personally examined Dumbledore during his NEWTS, leaned forward and said, in a voice like dry leaves, "Well, that's the most sensible thing anyone said in this chamber in 30 years. The vote was 4-1. Bones, Ogden, and Marchbanks for confirmation, without hesitation. Dumbledore voted for, after a pause that lasted long enough for the entire chamber to notice. Fudge voted against, his eyes darting to Malfoy, and then immediately began backpedaling when he realized he was alone, claiming he'd misunderstood the question. The Pendragon claim was confirmed. Formally, legally, irrevocably. Harry walked out of the chamber to the sound of applause from the gallery and the scratch of Rita Skeeter's quill, and he did not look at Lucius Malfoy as he passed, but he felt the man's gaze on his back like the point of a knife. The next morning's Daily Prophet carried the headline across its entire front page, "Pendragon confirmed, boy who lived declared heir of Arthur." Below it, a photograph of Harry standing in the center of the Wizengamot floor with Excalibur drawn, the light of the blade turning his eyes to green fire. Harry read the article over breakfast, Neville sitting across from him. Augusta had dropped him off for the day, and the visits were becoming regular, and set it aside with a shake of his head. "Rita Skeeter writes like she's being paid by the adjective," he said. Neville, who was feeding Trevor bits of bacon under the table, looked up. "She called you the diminutive dynastic dynamo. Is that even English?" "Barely. But the article did its work." Across magical Britain, in pubs and shops and sitting rooms, people talked. They argued. They believed or they didn't. But they talked, and the name Pendragon entered the common vocabulary for the first time in 15 centuries, attached to a boy with a scar and a sword, and something that had been dormant in the collective consciousness of the magical world began to stir. Hope, perhaps. Or memory. Or both. The weeks that followed were busy. Harry's education accelerated. Griphook handled politics, law, and economics. A goblin weapons master named Ironclaw handled physical training and combat, and for magic itself, Ragnarok had quietly engaged a series of private tutors, each expert in a specific discipline, each bound by goblin contract to absolute discretion. Harry learned fast. Unervingly fast, his tutors said. His magical core was enormous. The combination of Potter blood, Pendragon heritage, and Excalibur's awakening had produced a wellspring of raw power that most adult wizards would have envied. But it wasn't just power. It was understanding. Arthur's memories gave him an intuitive grasp of magical theory that his tutors struggled to keep ahead of. He didn't just cast spells, he understood why they worked, the way a musician understands harmony rather than just notes. And then there was the sword work. Harry trained with Ironclaw every morning at dawn. The goblin was ancient, scarred, and about as sympathetic as a rock slide. He'd been training warriors for 200 years, and he treated Harry exactly the way he treated every other student, with brutal honesty and the expectation of excellence. Again, Ironclaw barked. Harry reset his stance, Excalibur balanced in his hands, and came at the goblin with a combination that blended Arthur's remembered technique with the goblin style Ironclaw was teaching him, shorter, faster, designed for a smaller fighter against larger opponents. Ironclaw parried, countered, and swept Harry's legs out from under him. Harry hit the ground, rolled, came up with the blade already moving, and caught Ironclaw's follow-up strike in a bind that forced the goblin back 3 steps. "Better," Ironclaw said, which from him was practically a standing ovation. "Your instincts are sound, but you're relying on memory." Arthur's body was 6 feet tall with 20 years of muscle. Yours is not. Stop trying to fight like a grown man and start fighting like what you are, small, fast, and carrying a sword that cuts through anything. Anything? Harry asked. Ironclaw drew his own blade, a heavy goblin-forged war axe, and nodded. "Hit me." Harry swung. Excalibur met the axe, and the goblin-forged steel, among the strongest metal in the magical world, parted like butter. The top half of the axe head spun away and embedded itself in the training yard wall. Ironclaw looked at the ruin of his weapon. "That was my favorite axe." "Sorry. Don't be. That's what Excalibur does. It was forged to cut through magic, through enchantment, through anything that stands against the rightful king. In Arthur's time, it shattered the shields of dark wizards and cut through wards like cobwebs." Ironclaw picked up the severed axe head and examined it. "In your hands, it will do the same. The sword is only as strong as its wielder's will, and your will." He looked at Harry with something that might have been respect. "Your will is considerable." Harry flipped Excalibur and caught it by the blade, a showman's trick that Arthur remembered from tournaments, impossible without magical protection from the edge, and grinned. Again. Again. It was on a warm evening in late June, 2 months after the tribunal, that the first attempt on Harry's life came. He was in the study, reading a book on ancient ward structures that his tutor had assigned, with Excalibur leaning against the desk and Trevor the Toad sitting on a stack of parchment. Neville had left Trevor behind on his last visit, claiming it was an accident, but Harry suspected the Toad had simply chosen a new home and Neville was too kind to argue. Mipsy popped in with a package. "This is being delivered to the gate, Master Harry. The Goblins is checking it for curses and is saying it is clean." Harry looked at the package. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, with no return address. A card was attached, "For the young king, with admiration." A token of respect. Something prickled at the back of Harry's neck. Not a memory. An instinct. Arthur had received gifts from admirers and enemies alike, and the ones without names attached were always the most dangerous. He set the package on the desk and drew Excalibur. The sword's glow brightened. Not much, a subtle intensification, like a candle flame in a draught, but Harry had learned to read Excalibur the way a sailor reads the wind. The sword was reacting to something. "Mipsy, step back." The elf retreated. Harry held Excalibur over the package and let the blade's edge barely touch the brown paper wrapping. The package screamed. It was a sound that went beyond hearing, a psychic shriek of malice that hit Harry's mind like a hammer. The brown paper blackened and peeled back, revealing what was inside, a brooch, silver, set with a dark stone that pulsed with oily black light. Dark magic. Not just dark, vicious. The stone radiated hatred and killing intent so thick Harry could taste it, metallic and bitter on the back of his tongue. Excalibur's light blazed white. Harry didn't think. He brought the blade down on the brooch in a single, clean strike. The stone shattered. The dark magic blasted outward in a wave of black smoke and screaming, and Excalibur's light met it and burned it clean. The smoke dissolved. The screaming stopped. What was left on the desk was a piece of twisted silver and a handful of dust where the stone had been. Harry stood over the wreckage, breathing hard, Excalibur still raised. His heart was hammering. The study smelled like burning metal and something else, something sweet and rotten, like decayed flowers. "Mipsy," Harry said, very calmly. "Get Ragnarok." The investigation took 2 days. Goblin cursebreakers examined the remains of the brooch and identified the dark magic as a lethal blood curse, designed to activate on skin contact. If Harry had opened the package and touched the brooch without Excalibur's warning, the curse would have killed him in seconds. The brooch was untraceable. The delivery method was mundane, a hired owl, paid in cash, with no record of the sender. But Ragnarok's people were thorough, and goblin thoroughness made the DMLE look like amateurs. The silver was from a specific mine in Wiltshire, owned by a consortium that included 3 families. One of them was the Malfoys. "It's not proof," Harry said, sitting across from Ragnarok in the director's office at Gringotts. "Not legal proof." "No," Ragnarok agreed. Malfoy is too careful for that. The connection is buried under 3 layers of shell ownership and intermediary transactions. It would take months to trace, and by then, the evidence would have been cleaned. He tried to kill me. Almost certainly. The tribunal wounded him. His coalition is fracturing, 3 of the 12 seats have already withdrawn their support. He's losing control of the narrative, and men like Malfoy respond to loss of control with escalation. Ragnarok's black eyes were hard. This will not be the last attempt. Harry touched Excalibur's hilt. The sword pulsed warmly, steadily, as if to say, I am here. Then we need to escalate too, Harry said. Not with violence. Not yet. But Malfoy needs to understand that attacking me has costs. He thought for a moment, Arthur's strategic mind turning the problem like a gemstone, examining facets. The Malfoy financial records. Gringotts has access. We have records of every transaction through this bank. The Malfoy accounts are extensive. And if those records happen to show irregularities, connections to known Death Eaters, payments that coincide with Dark Lord activity, assets acquired through confiscated Muggle-born property during the war, such records would exist, Ragnarok said carefully, because such transactions occurred. Gringotts maintains accurate records. Whether those records are made available to the DMLE is a matter of goblin discretion. Then use your discretion, Harry said. Amelia Bones is honest, and she's been looking for a way to go after Malfoy's finances for years. Give her the tools. Ragnarok's smile was all teeth. Consider it done. Harry arrived back at Potter Manor to find Neville waiting for him in the garden, Trevor in hand, looking anxious. I heard about the package, Neville said. Gran told me. Are you okay? I'm fine. Excalibur caught it. Neville fidgeted with Trevor, who bore this with the long-suffering patience of a toad who had accepted his lot in life. Harry, I want to help. You do help. You're my friend. No, I want to help. Learn to fight. Learn magic. Whatever you're doing to prepare for, he gestured vaguely, encompassing everything, the politics, the threats, the ancient destiny. All of it. I know I'm not brave like you, or smart like you, and I can barely do magic at all. Gran thinks I might be a squib. But I want to try. Harry looked at his friend. He saw a pudgy, anxious boy clutching a toad, wearing someone else's expectations like a coat that didn't fit. And overlaid on that, like a double-exposed photograph, he saw something Arthur recognized, the raw material of loyalty. The kind of person who wouldn't flinch when it mattered. Not flash, not brilliance, just bedrock courage buried under years of being told he wasn't enough. You're not a squib, Harry said. You have magic. I can feel it. It's just, buried. Locked up. You're afraid of it, and it's afraid of you, and until one of you makes the first move, neither of you will get anywhere. Neville's eyes widened. You can feel it. Excalibur's wake-up call came with some perks. Harry drew the sword, held it horizontally in front of him, and focused. The blade glowed, and in the glow, he could see what he'd learned to call auras, the magical signatures that every magical being carried. Neville's was there, a soft gold light around his core, but it was dim, flickering, like a fire that had been banked too low. Not weak. Suppressed. Someone's been dampening your magic, Harry said, frowning. It's not natural. There's something, a binding, or a block, what? Neville went pale. That's, who would, I don't know. But I know people who can find out. Harry sheathed Excalibur. Come to Gringotts with me tomorrow. The healers there are the best in the world, and they owe me a favor. Several, actually. Neville swallowed. Okay. Yeah. I'll come. Harry put a hand on his shoulder. Neville. You're going to be fine. Better than fine. I don't collect useless people, and I don't make friends out of pity. You're here because I want you here. Clear. Neville's chin came up. Just a fraction. But it came up. Clear. Good. Now come inside. Mipsy's made enough food for 6 people and she'll cry if we don't eat all of it. They went inside, and the evening was warm, and for a few hours, they were just 2 boys eating too much food and talking about nothing, and the weight of crowns and swords and ancient destinies could wait until morning. But morning came, as it always did. And with it, a letter that changed everything. Harry found it in the study, in a drawer of his father's desk that he could have sworn he'd already searched. It was tucked beneath a false bottom, old parchment, sealed with a charm that had faded with time. His father's handwriting. Harry recognized it from other documents, the bold, slightly messy script of a man who thought faster than he wrote. Harry, if you're reading this, your mother and I are dead, and Dumbledore's sealed our will, and you've somehow found your way to this desk anyway, which means you're either very clever or very lucky or both, and since you're our son, I'm betting on both. There are things you need to know that the will doesn't cover. Things Dumbledore doesn't know I know. Sirius Black is your godfather. He is not a traitor. He was not our secret keeper. We switched at the last moment, Dumbledore's idea, actually, though he'll deny it, to Peter Pettigrew. If Sirius has been blamed for our deaths, he is innocent. Peter is the traitor. Peter is the one who sold us to Voldemort. I'm writing this because I don't trust that the truth will come out on its own. There are people who benefit from Sirius taking the blame, not just Death Eaters, but people in the Ministry, people who want the war over and wrapped up neatly, who won't want to admit they put an innocent man in Azkaban. Find Sirius. Free him. He's the best man I ever knew, and he loves you more than you can imagine. I love you, Harry. Your mother loves you. Whatever happens, remember that. Dad. Harry read the letter twice. Then he set it down on the desk, very carefully, and placed both hands flat on the wood, and breathed. Sirius Black. His godfather. In Azkaban, the wizarding prison, the place of dementors and despair, where the worst of the worst were sent to rot. Harry had read about it in his studies. He'd read about Sirius Black, too, the betrayer of the Potters, the mass murderer, the man who'd killed 13 people with a single curse on a London street. Except that his father's letter said none of it was true. Harry looked at the letter again. At the handwriting, slightly smudged, written in a hurry by a man who knew he might not survive. At the love in it, and the fear, and the desperate hope that his son would find it and do what needed to be done. The still place inside Harry, the lake, the calm center, was not still. It was boiling. He picked up the letter, picked up Excalibur, and went to find Ragnarok. The old goblin read the letter in silence. When he finished, he set it down and looked at Harry with an expression that was, for the first time in their acquaintance, openly troubled. If this is true, Ragnarok said, then Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 6 years for a crime he did not commit. My father wouldn't lie about this. Not in a letter to me. No. James Potter was many things, but a liar was not among them. Ragnarok steepled his fingers. The problem is proof. A letter from a dead man is compelling but not conclusive. The Ministry will resist reopening the case. There was never a trial, Harry. Sirius Black was sent to Azkaban without one. Without a trial. It was the end of the war. People wanted closure. Bartemius Crouch was head of the DMLE, and he was not known for his commitment to due process. Black was captured at the scene, the street was destroyed, Pettigrew was presumed dead, and that was that. Ragnarok's expression soured further. No trial means no record. No evidence examined. No defense presented. Just a man thrown into a cell and forgotten. Then we force a trial, Harry said. His voice was flat and hard. I am the head of House Potter. Sirius is my godfather, named in my parents' will. I have standing to demand it. And with this letter, you have grounds. But, Harry. Ragnock leaned forward. This will be a fight. A real one. Half the ministry's credibility rests on the black conviction. If it falls apart, heads will roll. Crouch, Fudge, possibly Dumbledore himself, who sat on the Wizengamot and did nothing to demand a trial for a man he personally recruited into his Order of the Phoenix. Good, Harry said. Let heads roll. Ragnock looked at him for a long moment. You are very like Arthur, when you're angry. Arthur lost his kingdom because he let injustice fester. Because he trusted the people around him to do the right thing and they didn't. I won't make that mistake. Harry held Ragnock's gaze. File the petition. Tomorrow. It will take time. Months, most likely. The ministry will delay, obstruct, and stall. Then we make the cost of delay higher than the cost of action. The same way we did with the guardianship. The same way we did with the Pendragon claim. We go public, we build pressure, and we don't stop until Sirius Black gets the trial he should have had 6 years ago. Ragnock nodded slowly. I'll have the petition drafted tonight. He paused. Harry. If Black is innocent, if Pettigrew is the traitor, then Pettigrew is still alive somewhere. Hiding. And if Voldemort returns, then Pettigrew will go back to him. I know. Harry's hand tightened on Excalibur's hilt. One problem at a time. Sirius first. He walked out of Gringotts into the late afternoon sun, and the sword at his hip hummed with the resonance of a promise made, and somewhere in the darkness of Azkaban, a man who had been innocent for 6 years shivered in his cell and dreamed, as he more actions continue. Chapter 3. The weight of crowns. The petition to reopen the case of Sirius Black landed on the desk of Cornelius Fudge on a Tuesday morning in September, and by Tuesday afternoon, the Minister for Magic had developed a migraine. So severe his secretary thought he was having a stroke. Harry knew this because Amelia Bones told him, and she told him with the grim satisfaction of a woman who had spent years watching Fudge dodge every difficult decision that crossed his desk and was now watching him get pinned to the wall by a 7-year-old with a magic sword. He tried to bury it, Bones said. They were sitting in her office at the DMLE, a cluttered, no-nonsense space that looked exactly like its occupant. Bones had a stack of files on her desk that could have doubled as a fortification, and she spoke with the blunt efficiency of someone who had too much work and too little patience for politics. Sent it to the Archives Division with a note to review at earliest convenience, which in ministry speak means lose it in a drawer and hope everyone forgets. And? Harry asked. And I pulled it out of archives an hour later and filed it as a formal DMLE investigation request, which means it goes on the public docket and Fudge can't make it disappear without creating a paper trail. She looked at Harry over the top of her monocle. You understand what you've started, Mr. Potter. This isn't just about one man in a cell. If Black is innocent, then the entire post-war judicial process is called into question. Dozens of cases. Hundreds of decisions. Crouch's entire tenure as DMLE head comes under review. Good. Good for justice, perhaps. Bad for stability. There are people who will fight this not because they believe Black is guilty, but because the alternative, admitting the system failed, is more terrifying to them than leaving an innocent man in Azkaban. Then they'll lose, Harry said, because I don't stop. Bones studied him. She had a way of looking at people that reminded Harry of Ragnock, assessing, weighing, measuring. No, she said. I don't believe you do. Very well. I'll push the investigation forward. But I need something from you. Name it. Stay out of the press on this one. At least until I've gathered enough evidence to make the case airtight. If you go to the Prophet now, Fudge will spin it as political theater, the Pendragon heir attacking the ministry for attention. Give me time to build the case properly, and when we bring it to the Wizengamot, it'll be a sledgehammer, not a slap. Harry considered this. Every instinct, both Harry's and Arthur's, wanted to move fast, to push, to apply pressure until something broke. But Bones was right. She was a professional, and she was asking for room to do her job. How long? 3 months. Maybe 4. You have 2. Bones's mouth twitched. You drive a hard bargain for someone who can't legally buy a butterbeer. I learned from goblins. She actually smiled at that. 2 months. I'll have something for you by November. Now get out of my office. I have 14 open cases and a minister who's going to come down here any minute to yell at me. Harry left the ministry through the atrium, grip hook at his side, and they were halfway to the apparition point when a voice stopped him. Mr. Potter. Harry turned. Lucius Malfoy stood near the fountain, leaning on his silver-headed cane with the casual elegance of a man who owned the building and everyone in it. He was smiling. It was the smile of a man who had never been genuinely threatened in his life and therefore didn't recognize when he was being outmaneuvered, or, more dangerously, recognized it perfectly and was smiling anyway. Lord Malfoy, Harry said. A word, if you have a moment. Malfoy glanced at Griphook. Privately. Anything you say to me, you can say in front of my advisor. Something shifted behind Malfoy's pale eyes. Irritation, maybe. Or recalculation. As you wish. I wanted to congratulate you on the tribunal. A masterful performance. Truly. You have a gift for oratory that belies your age. Is that what this is? Congratulations. In part. I also wanted to offer an observation. Malfoy's voice dropped, not to a whisper but to the quiet, intimate tone of a man sharing a confidence. You've made remarkable progress in a short time, Mr. Potter. The Pendragon claim, the guardianship reversal, the Goblin alliance. Impressive. But you're making enemies faster than you're making friends, and the enemies you're making are not the kind who forget. Is that a threat, Lord Malfoy? It's advice. From someone who understands how power works in this world. Malfoy's smile didn't waver. You have the goblins. You have Bones. You have a sword and a story. But stories fade, Mr. Potter. The news cycle moves on. The public's attention wanders. And when it does, you'll find that the people who matter in magical Britain, the old families, the real power, are the ones who were here before you and will be here after. Some of those people could be your allies, if you were willing to be pragmatic. Harry looked at Lucius Malfoy. He looked at the silver cane and the tailored robes and the smooth, handsome face and the pale eyes that calculated everything and felt nothing, and Arthur's memories stirred. Mordred, another beautiful liar, another man who smiled while he sharpened his knife. Lord Malfoy, Harry said, 3 weeks ago, someone sent me a cursed brooch designed to kill me on contact. The silver was traced to a mine in Wiltshire owned by a consortium that includes your family. Malfoy's expression didn't change. Not a flicker. A coincidence, surely. The Malfoy consortium owns interests in dozens of mines. We can hardly be held responsible for the provenance of every piece of silver that, I'm not finished. Harry's voice was quiet, and Griphook, who knew that tone, took a careful step back. You asked me to be pragmatic. Here is my pragmatism. I know what you are, Lord Malfoy. I know what the mark on your left forearm means, and I know that the story you told about being under the Imperious curse was a lie, and I know that you are currently using your seat on the Wisengamot to protect the interests of families who served the darkest wizard in a century. The atrium was busy. People were passing on all sides, absorbed in their own business. Nobody was paying particular attention to the tall blonde wizard and the small boy by the fountain. But Malfoy's smile had gone fixed, and his knuckles on the silver cane were white. You can't prove any of that, Malfoy said. His voice was still smooth, still controlled, but something underneath it had hardened. Not yet, Harry said. But I have the resources of Gringotts, the cooperation of the DMLE, and all the time in the world. You tried to kill me and failed. You tried to challenge my claim and failed. Every move you make against me will fail, Lord Malfoy, because you are fighting against something that is bigger and older and truer than anything you have, and you know it. He held Malfoy's gaze. The pale grey eyes met green, and for a long moment, neither of them blinked. "Stay out of my way," Harry said. "That's my pragmatism." He turned and walked away, Griphook falling into step beside him. Behind them, Lucius Malfoy stood by the fountain with his smile gone and his hand gripping his cane hard enough to crack the silver serpent's skull, and in the shadows behind his eyes, something cold and dangerous began to calculate. October came in cold and wet, and Harry trained. He trained with Ironclaw every morning, the sessions growing longer and more brutal as his body caught up with his instincts. He was still small, 8 in July, but lean now rather than thin, the malnutrition of the Dursleys slowly giving way to proper nutrition and relentless exercise. Ironclaw had him running the manor grounds at dawn, doing footwork drills on balance beams, sparring with weighted practice swords before he was allowed to touch Excalibur. "The sword makes you dangerous," Ironclaw said, watching Harry work through a complex sequence of cuts and parries. "Your body makes you survivable. If someone takes the sword, and don't tell me it can't happen, because complacency kills faster than any curse, you need to be able to fight, run, and survive with nothing but your hands and your head." "Has anyone ever told you you're a cheerful person?" Harry asked, parrying a strike that would have broken his arm if he'd been a beat slower. "Frequently. I killed the last one." Harry laughed, ducked a horizontal slash, and countered with a spinning cut that made Ironclaw grunt with approval. The goblin's style was different from Arthur's remembered technique, lower, faster, built around exploiting the angles that a smaller fighter could reach but a taller one couldn't. Harry was blending the two, creating something new, something that was neither purely goblin nor purely Arthurian but a hybrid that used his small size as an advantage rather than a limitation. After sword work, magic. Harry's tutors rotated, a different specialist each week, covering charms, transfiguration, defense, warding, and ritual magic. He was, by any objective measure, years ahead of where a Hogwarts first year would be, and accelerating. His magical core, already large, was growing as he used it, like a muscle being exercised. But it was the wandless magic that set him apart. Most wizards needed a wand, a focus, a channel, a tool to shape raw magic into specific effects. Harry had a wand, purchased from Ollivanders the previous year, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, and Ollivander had gone very pale and very quiet when it chose him. He used it for precise work, for complex spells that required fine control. But for raw power, for the big, elemental, will-driven magic that Arthur had wielded in battle, he didn't need it. Excalibur served that function, but even without the sword, Harry could push magic through his hands, through his voice, through sheer intent, in ways that made his tutors first impressed and then quietly unnerved. "It's the Pendragon heritage," Griphook explained, when Harry asked about it. Arthur was a wandless caster. The most powerful of his era. The wand tradition didn't become dominant until after his death. It was Merlin, actually, who popularized wand use, as a way to make magic accessible to wizards with smaller cores. Before that, the great wizards cast with voice and gesture and will alone. He paused. "You have that ability. It's rare. Perhaps 3 living wizards can do what you do, and none of them are 7. Who are the 3? Dumbledore is one. He rarely uses wandless magic in public, but he's capable of it. The Dark Lord was another, before his fall. The 3rd. Griphook hesitated. Is unknown. There are rumors of a wandless caster in Eastern Europe, but nothing confirmed. Harry filed this away. 3 wizards. Dumbledore, Voldemort, and a mystery. He was the 4th, and he was 7 years old, and every day the power grew easier to wield and harder to measure. He didn't hide it. That was a deliberate choice, and Ragnarok had questioned it more than once. Concealment has strategic value, the director had argued. If your enemies underestimate you, my enemies will overestimate me, Harry had countered. That's better. An enemy who underestimates you will attack, and you'll have to fight. An enemy who overestimates you will hesitate, and you'll have time. I'd rather be feared and have peace than be underestimated and have war. Ragnar had conceded the point with a nod that was almost respectful. So Harry trained openly. He held sessions on the manor grounds where his goblin guards could see, and word filtered out, as he intended it to. The boy who lived, the Pendragon heir, training with goblin weapons masters, casting magic beyond newt level at the age of 7. The stories grew in the telling, they always did, but the truth was impressive enough. Neville came every week. Sometimes more. The visit to Gringotts had confirmed what Harry suspected. Neville's magic was being suppressed by a binding placed on him as an infant. The goblin's analysis was detailed and damning. The binding was old, crude, and had been placed by someone with more power than finesse. It wasn't malicious in intent, it appeared to have been designed to contain accidental magic, to prevent a powerful magical child from hurting himself or others during the volatile early years. But it had never been removed, and as Neville grew, it had tightened, strangling his magical development like a vine choking a tree. Augusta Longbottom, when informed, had gone sheet white and then incandescent with fury. She demanded to know who had placed the binding. The goblin's analysis pointed to a signature that was old, powerful, and familiar. Dumbledore. He was there when Neville was born, Augusta had said, her voice shaking with controlled rage. He visited the family. He said Neville's accidental magic was unusually strong for an infant, and he offered to place temporary safeguards. Temporary. He said they'd dissolve on their own by age 5. They hadn't dissolved. Whether by design or negligence, the binding had remained, and Neville had grown up believing he was barely magical, a near squib, a disappointment to his grandmother and the memory of his parents. The goblins removed it. The process took 3 sessions over 2 weeks, and Neville screamed during the first one, not from pain, but from the sheer overwhelming rush of his own magic flooding back into channels that had been dammed for 7 years. Harry held his hand through all 3 sessions, and on the last day, when Neville stood up from the ritual chair and accidentally blew every window out of the room with a surge of raw, joyful, uncontrolled power, Harry caught him before he fell and said, "There you are." Neville had cried. Big, ugly, hiccuping sobs, the kind that come when you've been told your whole life that you're not enough and you suddenly discover that you were always enough, that the deficit was never in you but in what was done to you. Harry let him cry. He didn't say anything trite or comforting. He just held on and let the grief and the relief run their course, and when it was done, Neville wiped his face and looked at Harry with eyes that were different, clearer, steadier, with a light in them that hadn't been there before. "I want to learn everything," Neville said. "Then we start tomorrow." Neville wasn't Harry. He didn't have 15 centuries of battle memory or a legendary sword or a magical core that could light up a city. But what he had, what the binding had hidden, was substantial. His magic was strong, earthy, and deeply connected to living things. Plants responded to him like he was sunlight. Within a week of the binding's removal, Neville could make a dead flower bloom by touching it. Within a month, he was coaxing growth from seeds that should have taken weeks to sprout, and the manor gardens, already impressive under Mipsy's care, became something extraordinary, a riot of color and life that made visitors stop and stare. Herbology prodigy, Griphook observed, watching Neville encourage a venomous tentacula to do tricks. "There hasn't been a natural like this in decades." "He's more than that," Harry said. "He just needs time to see it." They trained together in the afternoons. Harry taught Neville swordwork, not Excalibur-level combat, but basic staff and blade technique that Ironclaw approved of with grudging nods. Neville was never going to be a duelist, but he was strong, had good instincts once he stopped second-guessing himself, and possessed a stubborn endurance that meant he'd take a hit, get up, and come back harder. In magic, they pushed each other. Harry was the raw power, Neville was the precision, the patience, the willingness to do a spell 100 times until it was right. They complemented each other in a way that felt less like coincidence and more like design, and sometimes, in the quiet moments between lessons, Harry would look at Neville and feel an echo, not a memory, but a resonance, of the companionship Arthur had known at the Round Table. The knowledge that you were not alone. That someone had your back. That the weight of the world was distributed, even if only a little, across more than one set of shoulders. November arrived, and Amelia Bones delivered. The file she brought to Potter Manor was 3 inches thick. She spread it across the study desk, reports, interviews, analysis, evidence, and walked Harry through it with the methodical precision of a woman who had spent 2 months building a case that could not be dismantled. Peter Pettigrew, Bones said, pointing to a photograph of a small, watery-eyed man with thinning hair and a nervous disposition. Officially dead. Killed by Sirius Black on November 1, 1981, along with 12 Muggle bystanders. The story is that Black cornered Pettigrew on a London street. Pettigrew confronted him, Black blew up the street, and all that was found of Pettigrew was a finger. A finger, Harry said flatly. A single finger. The index finger of his right hand. Conveniently, the largest piece of evidence and the only piece of Pettigrew ever recovered. Bones's expression could have etched glass. I've had my forensic team review the blast analysis from 1981. The explosion pattern is consistent with a blasting curse, but the point of origin is wrong. If Black cast the curse from his position, which eyewitnesses confirm, the blast should have radiated away from Pettigrew. Instead, the crater pattern suggests the explosion originated at Pettigrew's location and radiated outward. Pettigrew blew up the street himself. That's the most likely explanation. A preemptive strike disguised as a defensive last stand. He blows the street, kills the Muggles as cover, cuts off his own finger to leave proof of his death, and escapes in the chaos. Bones turned a page. There's more. Pettigrew was a registered animagus, or rather, he should have been. We found records in the DMLE archives showing that the Marauders, your father, Black, and Pettigrew, taught themselves the animagus transformation during their Hogwarts years. Your father was a stag. Black is a large black dog. Pettigrew. A rat, Harry said. He didn't know how he knew. The word just came, sharp and certain, from a place that was pure Harry, the boy whose father had written a letter in fear and love. A rat, Bones confirmed. Small enough to escape through a drain. Small enough to hide anywhere. And if he's been living as a rat for the past 6 years, he could be anywhere. With anyone. And no one would know. Bones nodded. The case for Black's innocence is circumstantial but compelling. The blast analysis, the animagus records, the lack of a trial, and your father's letter. Any one piece alone might not be enough. Together, they create reasonable doubt, more than enough to justify a trial. When? I've submitted the formal request. The Wisingamot will schedule it, they have to, now that it's on the public docket. Fudge will try to delay, but I've preempted that by filing a simultaneous request with the International Confederation of Wizards Judicial Oversight Body. If Britain doesn't try Black within 60 days, the ICW can intervene. Fudge is terrified of international scrutiny. Good. Let him be terrified. Harry looked at the photograph of Pettigrew. The watery eyes stared back at him, and he felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. This man had betrayed his parents. Had stood in their house, eaten at their table, held Harry as a baby, and then sold them to Voldemort for, what? Fear. Power. It didn't matter. The result was the same. James and Lily Potter were dead, and Sirius Black was rotting in Azkaban, and Peter Pettigrew was alive, somewhere, wearing a rat's skin and a coward's heart. We'll find him, Harry said. After the trial. After Sirius is free. One thing at a time, Bones agreed. She gathered the files and stood. The trial will be set within 2 weeks. Be ready. Malfoy's coalition will oppose it, they have to, because several of them used the same imperious defense that Black's conviction implicitly validates. If Black was wrongly convicted, it raises questions about every Death Eater who claimed they were controlled. Including Malfoy himself. Especially Malfoy. He's going to fight this, Harry. Hard. Let him. Bones gave him a look that was equal parts respect and exasperation. You know, for a child, you're remarkably exhausting. I've been told. The trial was scheduled for December 15th. 2 weeks away. Harry spent every day preparing, and every night dreaming. The dreams were different now. Less fragmentary, more coherent, as if Arthur's memories were organizing themselves, sorting into sequence, becoming accessible rather than random. Harry dreamed of the round table, not the furniture, but the idea, the compact, the revolutionary notion that a king's power came not from divine right but from the consent and counsel of his peers. He dreamed of the knights who sat at that table, Lancelot, brilliant and flawed, Gawain, fierce and loyal, Percival, pure of heart, Bedivere, steady as stone. And he dreamed of the failures. Mordred's slow corruption. Lancelot's betrayal with Guinevere. The fracturing of trust that had brought the whole shining edifice crashing down. Arthur had built something beautiful, and it had broken because he believed that goodness was enough, that loyalty was permanent, that the people he loved would never destroy him. Harry woke from those dreams with a hollow ache in his chest and the taste of ash in his mouth, and he lay in the dark and thought about the difference between Arthur's world and his own. Arthur had been betrayed by people he trusted. Harry had been betrayed before he was old enough to trust anyone, by Dumbledore, by Pettigrew, by a world that had celebrated his survival and then abandoned him to a cupboard. The difference was that Harry had no illusions to shatter. He knew, in a way Arthur never had, that trust was earned, not given, and that the people who smiled widest were often the ones reaching for the knife. It made him harder than Arthur had been. He knew that. Ragnarok knew it. Griphook knew it. Even Neville, who saw the best in everyone, sometimes looked at Harry with an expression that was half admiration and half worry, as if he could see the edge in his friend and wasn't sure it was entirely healthy. But it also made him effective. And right now, effectiveness mattered more than warmth. December 15th dawned gray and cold. Harry dressed carefully, formal robes, dark green with the Potter and Pendragon crests, Excalibur at his hip. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a boy who could pass for 10, lean and sharp-featured, with green eyes that held too much knowledge and a scar that the world couldn't stop staring at. "You look like your father," the mirror said. Enchanted mirrors at Potter Manor had opinions. "But there's something else. Something older." "I know," Harry said, and went downstairs. Neville was waiting in the entrance hall, also in formal robes, looking nervous but resolute. Augusta stood behind him, her vulture hat at its most imposing angle. "You didn't have to come," Harry told them. "Don't be ridiculous," Augusta said. "The Longbottom seat will vote for this trial. I want to be there to cast it." Neville just nodded. "I'm with you." Harry looked at his friend, really looked, the way Excalibur had taught him to look, seeing the aura, the magic, the truth of a person. Neville's aura was solid gold now, warm and steady, the flickering uncertainty of 6 months ago replaced by something rooted and real. He wasn't fearless. He was afraid and standing there anyway. Arthur would have called that knightly. Harry called it friendship, and valued it just as much. The Wizengamot chamber was packed. Every seat was taken, the gallery was standing room only, and the press box was overflowing. Rita Skeeter had commandeered a front row position and was wearing an expression of such gleeful anticipation that she looked slightly unhinged. Harry took his place at the petitioner's podium. Across the chamber, Lucius Malfoy sat in his hereditary seat, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, the fathers, not the sons, though the resemblance was unmistakable. Malfoy's face was a mask of aristocratic calm, but his hand rested on his cane with a tension that betrayed the calm for what it was. Dumbledore sat in the Chief Warlock's chair. He looked tired. Harry noticed this without sympathy. The old wizard had had 6 years to give Sirius Black a trial and had done nothing. Tired was the least of what he deserved. "This session of the Wizengamot is convened," Dumbledore said, to hear the petition of Harry James Potter Pendragon for the formal trial of Sirius Orion Black, currently held in Azkaban prison. The petition alleges wrongful imprisonment without trial. Madam Bones, you have the floor. Bones was magnificent. She presented the case with the precision of a surgeon, the blast analysis, the animagus records, the sealed will, James Potter's letter, the complete absence of any trial or formal hearing. She called witnesses, the forensic curse-breaker who'd reanalyzed the London Street explosion, the DML archivist who'd found the Marauders' animagus records buried in a restricted file, and a Gringotts representative who testified to the authentication of James Potter's letter. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow. The chamber was silent. Even Skeeter had stopped writing, too absorbed to move her quill. Malfoy's coalition mounted their defense. It was technically competent. They challenged chain of custody, questioned the reliability of 6-year-old forensic evidence, and argued that James Potter's letter was hearsay from a dead man. But the arguments felt thin, desperate, the legal equivalent of bailing water from a sinking ship. Then Malfoy himself rose to speak. "Esteemed members of the Wizengamot," he said, his voice carrying the authority of old money and unshakable self-assurance. "What we are being asked to accept is extraordinary. That the hero narrative of November 1981, the night that defined our modern era, is fundamentally wrong. That a convicted mass murderer is innocent. That the Ministry, the DMLE, and the Chief Warlock himself all failed in their duty." He paused, letting the implication settle. Harry watched him work the room and felt a grudging respect for the man's skill, if nothing else. "I do not dispute that errors may have occurred," Malfoy continued. "War is chaotic. Decisions made in its aftermath are not always perfect. But to reopen this case, to drag the wizarding world through a trial that will undermine public confidence in our institutions, on the basis of a dead man's letter and the ambitions of a 7-year-old boy playing at kingship. Lord Malfoy." Harry's voice cut through the chamber like Excalibur through goblin steel. Malfoy stopped. The chamber turned. Harry stood at the petitioner's podium, and his eyes were very green and very cold. "You just called the sworn testimony of my father, a man who died fighting Voldemort, the ravings of a dead man. And you called me, the confirmed heir of Arthur Pendragon, verified by the oldest magical artifact in Britain, a boy playing at kingship." The chamber was utterly still. "Let me ask you something, Lord Malfoy. Where were you the night my parents died? Where were you when Voldemort, the flinch rippled through the room like a wave, was at the height of his power? Because the Gringotts records that were recently shared with the DMLE show some very interesting transactions from the Malfoy accounts during that period. Payments to known Death Eater families. Transfers to accounts that have been linked to Dark Lord operations. A rather large donation to Bartemius Crouch's office in the weeks after the war ended, around the same time that several accused Death Eaters, yourself included, were cleared of all charges." Malfoy's composure cracked. Just a fraction, just a hairline fissure in the mask, but in the silent, watching chamber, it was as loud as a scream. "You are out of order," Malfoy began. "I am the head of House Potter and House Pendragon, and I hold the founding seat of this body," Harry said. "I am never out of order in this chamber, Lord Malfoy. You challenged my claim and lost. You tried to kill me with a cursed brooch and thought I wouldn't trace the silver. And now you stand here and argue against justice for an innocent man, not because you believe he's guilty, but because if Sirius Black gets a trial, the precedent means you might get one too. And we both know how that would end." The chamber erupted. Shouts, gasps, the crack of Dumbledore's gavel. Skeeter's quill was moving so fast it was a blur. Malfoy was on his feet, his face bloodless, his hand white-knuckled on his cane. "Order!" Dumbledore's voice boomed through the chamber with a force that rattled the stone walls. The noise died. The old wizard looked at Harry, and his expression was complex, anger, certainly, but something else too. Something that might have been recognition. "Mr. Potter Pendragon. You will confine your remarks to the matter at hand." "The matter at hand is justice, Professor Dumbledore." It's always been justice. Harry held the old wizard's gaze. Sirius Black deserves a trial. Every person in this chamber knows it. The only question is whether we have the courage to give him one. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he looked at Bones, whose expression was carefully neutral. Then he looked at the chamber, at the faces of the Wizengamot members, at the press, at the packed gallery. The Wizengamot will vote, Dumbledore said. All in favor of granting Sirius Orion Black a formal trial, raise your hands. The hands went up. Not all at once, some slowly, some reluctantly, some with the sheepish look of people who were voting for the right thing and wished someone else had made them do it sooner. But they went up. Augusta Longbottom's hand was among the first, raised high and firm. Amelia Bones raised hers. Ogden. Marchbanks. Dozens more. Malfoy's coalition held. 12 hands stayed down. But 12 was not enough. The motion carries, Dumbledore said, and his voice was quiet, and he did not look at Harry. The trial of Sirius Orion Black will commence on January 10th, Madam Bones, make the arrangements. This session is adjourned. The gavel fell. Harry walked out of the chamber into a storm of noise, reporters shouting questions, flashbulbs popping, witches and wizards pressing forward to shake his hand or stare at the sword at his hip. He moved through it all with Grip Hook and Neville flanking him like a personal guard, and they didn't stop until they were in a private room off the atrium that Bones had arranged. The door closed. The noise cut off. Harry sat down in the nearest chair and let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. His hands were trembling again, not fear, not adrenaline, but the release of tension he'd been holding so tightly for so long that he'd forgotten it was there. Harry. Neville's voice was worried. I'm fine. Harry pressed his palms flat on his thighs until the trembling stopped. I'm fine. It worked. It worked, Grip Hook confirmed. Emphatically. Malfoy's coalition is in shambles, at least 4 of those 12 will defect after that performance. And Skeeter got every word. Tomorrow's profit will be devastating. Good. Harry closed his eyes. Behind them, Arthur's memories stirred, the echo of another victory in another court, the knowledge that winning a battle was not the same as winning a war. Malfoy was wounded but not finished. Dumbledore was passive but not powerless. And somewhere, in a prison in the middle of the North Sea, Sirius Black was still in a cell, surrounded by Dementors, not knowing that anyone was fighting for him. 4 weeks. The trial was in 4 weeks. Harry opened his eyes. Neville. Yeah. Thank you. For being here. Neville's face went pink, but his voice was steady. Where else would I be? The weeks between the vote and the trial were the most dangerous Harry had faced. 3 days after the Wizengamot session, 2 masked wizards operate inside the Potter Manor wards. This should have been impossible. The wards were ancient, reinforced by goblin wardsmiths, and layered deep enough to stop an army. But someone had given the attackers a key. A ward signature. An inside path. Harry was in the training yard with Ironclaw when the alarms went off, a shrieking, pulsing wail that made the air vibrate. The goblin guards were moving before the sound faded, weapons drawn, armor gleaming. Harry had Excalibur in his hand before conscious thought caught up with reflex. The 2 masked figures appeared at the edge of the yard. Death Eaters. Harry recognized the masks from photographs in the DMLE files Bones had shared, silver, skull-shaped, designed to terrify. They moved fast, wands up, and the first curse was already flying before they'd fully materialized. It was a killing curse. The sickly green light of Avada Kedavra streaked across the yard toward Harry, and time slowed the way it always did in combat, the world going sharp and crystalline, every detail etched in perfect clarity. Harry didn't dodge. He didn't need to. He raised Excalibur, and the blade met the killing curse, and the green light broke against it like a wave against a cliff. The curse didn't bounce, didn't reflect, it shattered, the dark magic coming apart on the blade's edge, fragmenting into harmless motes of green light that dissolved in the air like sparks. The Death Eaters froze. For 1 second, they stood there, staring at the boy who had just blocked an unblockable curse with a sword, and in that second of hesitation, everything ended. Harry moved. Not like a child. Not even like a trained fighter. Like something older, something that had been honed by 1,000 battles in another life and was now unleashed in this one, and Excalibur sang in his hands as he closed the distance. The first Death Eater got off one more curse, a Cruciatus, red and vicious, and Harry cut through it the same way he'd cut the killing curse, the blade shearing through dark magic as easily as it sheared through everything else, and then he was inside the man's guard and the flat of Excalibur slammed into his wand arm with a crack that echoed across the yard. The wand shattered. The Death Eater screamed, clutching his arm, and Harry spun past him and brought the blade up under the chin of the second attacker, stopping the edge a millimeter from the man's throat. "Move and I take your head," Harry said. His voice was very calm. The man didn't move. Goblin guards swarmed in, disarming both attackers, binding them with enchanted chains that glowed with runes. Ironclaw stood at the edge of the yard with his arms folded and an expression that suggested professional critique rather than concern. He'd moved to intervene, Harry knew, he'd seen the old goblin start forward, but Harry had been faster. Much faster. The masks were removed. Harry didn't recognize the faces, middle-aged wizards, nondescript, the kind of people you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But the dark mark was visible on both their forearms, faded but unmistakable. "Who sent you?" Harry asked. Neither answered. Harry hadn't expected them to. But he looked at them, really looked, the way he'd learned to look, with Excalibur's perception layered over his own, and he saw the threads of magic on them. Compulsion charms. Memory modification. Layered and sophisticated, designed to make them forget who had given them their orders even if they wanted to talk. "Someone went to a lot of trouble," Harry said to Ironclaw. "These aren't freelancers. They've been programmed. Compulsions and memory charms, whoever sent them made sure they couldn't betray the source." "Malfoy?" Ironclaw asked. "Maybe. Maybe not. This is more sophisticated than a cursed brooch." Harry sheathed Excalibur. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold clarity that was pure Arthur, the post-battle assessment, the strategic analysis, the refusal to let emotion cloud judgment. They got through the wards. That means someone gave them access. Someone who knows our ward structure. "The wardsmiths," Ironclaw said, and his voice was dangerous. "Check them. Check everyone who's had access to the ward schemes in the past 6 months. And increase the guard rotation. If they sent 2, they can send 20. They could send 200 and it wouldn't matter. Not after what I just saw." Ironclaw looked at Harry with an expression that was, for the first time, something more than professional respect. "That was the fastest combat I've seen in 2 centuries. You took the killing curse on the blade and didn't blink. Excalibur was made to fight dark magic. It's what the sword does. The sword is a tool. What I saw was the wielder." Ironclaw shook his head. "They should be afraid of you, Harry. Anyone with sense should be very, very afraid of you." Harry said nothing. He walked back into the manor, and behind him, the goblin guards dragged the unconscious Death Eaters away for interrogation, and the morning was cold and grey and the world was exactly as dangerous as it had always been. The investigation into the ward breach took 2 days and produced a result that surprised no one and sickened everyone. A junior goblin wardsmith, young, barely 50, with debts he couldn't pay and a family he couldn't feed, had been bribed. The gold was untraceable, routed through a dozen intermediary accounts. The wardsmith was arrested, tried under goblin law, which was swifter and considerably less forgiving than wizarding law, and sentenced to the goblin mines. His family was relocated and provided for. Harry insisted on this, over Ragnarok's initial objection, arguing that punishing the innocent alongside the guilty was the kind of injustice they were supposed to be fighting against. Ragnock had conceded, but his expression suggested that Harry's mercy was a luxury he found philosophically interesting and practically inadvisable. The ward schemes were rebuilt from scratch. New wardsmiths, new keys, new layers. Harry spent 3 days working alongside the goblin team, contributing his own magic to the wards, raw, powerful, laced with Excalibur's energy, until Potter Manor's defenses were stronger than they'd ever been. An ant couldn't cross the boundary without Harry knowing about it. "This changes the calculus," Griphook said, when the dust settled. "Whoever is behind this, and I think we can assume it's Malfoy, even if we can't prove it, has escalated from political maneuvering to assassination attempts. Twice. The cursed brooch was deniable. This was not. 2 Death Eaters with dark marks, sent to kill a 7-year-old boy. If this becomes public, it becomes public," Harry said. "Bones gets the full report. The Prophet gets enough to run the story. I want the magical world to know that someone is sending Death Eaters after me, and I want them to know that I stopped 2 killing curses with a sword and put both attackers on the ground in under 10 seconds. That will make you a target. I'm already a target. I'd rather be a target that everyone knows can fight back." The story broke 3 days before Christmas. The Prophet ran it on the front page, alongside a photograph of the bound Death Eaters being led into DMLE custody. The headline read, "Death Eaters attack Pendragon heir, boy who lived blocks killing curse with Excalibur." The reaction was seismic. Howlers flooded the ministry, demanding action. The DMLE opened a formal investigation. Public opinion, already shifting toward Harry after the Wisengamot tribunal, swung decisively. Lucius Malfoy was not named in the article. Harry had been careful about that, on Bones's advice, but the implication hung in the air like smoke, and Malfoy's political position, already weakened, began to crumble. Christmas at Potter Manor was quiet. Harry, Neville, Augusta, Ragnock, Griphook, Ironclaw, and Mipsy. Not a large gathering, but a warm one. Mipsy produced a feast that could have fed the Wisengamot, and Harry gave gifts, a rare herbology text for Neville, a bottle of goblin-aged brandy for Ragnock, who accepted it with the gravity of a man receiving a knighthood, and a new axe for Ironclaw, who tested the edge on the table and declared it acceptable, which was as close to effusive as the old warrior ever got. Neville gave Harry a plant. It was small, green, and entirely unremarkable, sitting in a clay pot that Neville had clearly decorated himself with more enthusiasm than skill. "It's a whomping willow sapling," Neville said, going red. "They're really rare. I grew it from a cutting. It'll protect whatever ground it's planted on. When it's full grown, nothing gets past it without permission. I thought, for the manor. Extra protection." Harry looked at the small, fierce little tree, already twitching its branches with aggressive potential, and felt something warm and tight in his chest that had nothing to do with magic. "It's perfect," he said. "Thank you, Neville." They planted it together on Boxing Day, in the manor's front garden, and the sapling drove its roots into the earth with an eagerness that made Neville beam and Harry laugh, and for a few hours, they were just 2 boys getting muddy in a garden, and the weight of crowns and swords and ancient destinies was lighter than it had been in a long time. But January was coming. And with it, the trial. Harry stood at his bedroom window on New Year's Eve, looking out over the manor grounds at midnight. Fireworks were going off somewhere in the distance, Muggle ones, colorful and loud, painting the sky in brief flashes of light that died as quickly as they were born. Excalibur lay on the bed behind him, glowing softly, and in the depths of its light, Harry thought he could see reflections, Arthur on a hilltop, looking out over a kingdom. Arthur in a great hall, surrounded by knights. Arthur on a battlefield, the sword in his hand and the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was 7 years old. In 2 weeks, he would stand in the Wisengamot and fight for a man he'd never met, a man who'd been betrayed by the same cowardice and corruption that had shaped Harry's own life. He would face Lucius Malfoy again, and Cornelius Fudge, and Albus Dumbledore, and whatever the magical world threw at him, and he would not bend. Not because he was brave. Not because he was Arthur reborn. But because Sirius Black was innocent, and someone had to fight for him, and Harry was done waiting for someone else to do it. He turned from the window, picked up Excalibur, and felt the sword's warmth seep into his hands like a promise. Soon, he whispered, to the sword and to the man in the cell and to the world that was about to change. The new year turned. The countdown was over. The real battle was about to begin. Chapter 4, The Return of the King. The morning of January 10th was the coldest day of the year. Frost clung to the windows of Potter Manor like white fingers, and the grounds were buried under a thin, hard layer of snow that crunched like broken glass underfoot. Harry stood at the kitchen window at 5 in the morning, watching the goblin guards make their rounds in the grey pre-dawn light, their breath steaming, their armor rimed with ice. He hadn't slept. The dreams had been bad, not Arthur's memories this time, but something worse. Harry's own imagination, filling in the gaps of what he didn't know with what he feared. A cell. Cold stone. The sound of the sea. And dementors, those things he'd read about in every account of Azkaban, the creatures that fed on happiness and hope and left nothing behind but despair. Sirius had been living with them for 6.5 years. Every day. Every night. No warmth, no light, no human kindness. Just the cold and the dark and the slow, grinding erosion of everything that made a person a person. Harry's hands tightened on the edge of the counter until his knuckles went white. Master Harry should be eating breakfast. Mipsy stood behind him, her enormous eyes worried, a plate of toast and eggs floating at her elbow. She'd learned, over the past year, not to push too hard when Harry was in one of his quiet moods, but she had her limits, and a missed meal was beyond them. "I'm not hungry, Mipsy." Master Harry is always saying that when he is being worried, and then he is being grumpy and making bad decisions on an empty stomach. Mipsy is not allowing this. Sit. Harry sat. He ate. Mipsy watched him with the satisfaction of a general who has won a minor engagement and is already planning the next campaign. By 6, Harry was dressed. The formal robes were the same ones he'd worn to the Wizengamot vote, dark green, Potter and Pendragon crests, tailored close. Excalibur hung at his hip. His wand was in a forearm holster under his left sleeve. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a boy who looked older than 8, leaner than he should be, with eyes that belonged to someone who had seen too much and intended to see more. Neville arrived at 6:30, dropped off by Augusta, who swept into the manor like a warship under full sail and immediately began arguing with Griphook about procedural strategy for the trial. Neville found Harry in the entrance hall and didn't say anything. He just stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, well, shoulder to arm, since Neville had hit a growth spurt and was now taller, and waited. "Thanks," Harry said. "You keep thanking me for just standing here. Standing here is the hard part. Anyone can talk. Not everyone shows up." Neville's ears went red, but he stood a little straighter. They traveled to the ministry by Portkey, a goblin-made one, which meant it was smooth, precise, and deposited them exactly where they intended to be, rather than the nauseating tumble of a standard ministry Portkey. They arrived in the private antechamber off the Wizengamot's main corridor, where Bones was already waiting. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her monocle was slightly askew, and there were shadows under her eyes, but the set of her jaw was granite. She had a case file under one arm that was even thicker than the one she'd brought to Potter Manor, additional evidence gathered in the intervening weeks, Harry assumed. "The chamber's full," Bones said without preamble. "Every seat taken, gallery packed, press box overflowing. We've got aura security on every entrance. Dumbledore's already seated. Malfoy's there with his full coalition, what's left of it. 8 seats now, down from 12. And Sirius?" Bones's expression softened, just slightly. "Being transported from Azkaban now. He'll be brought in under aura escort." "Harry." She paused, choosing her words. "He's been in Azkaban for 6.5 years. The Dementors, there's no gentle way to say this. He won't be what you're expecting. He won't be the man in your father's photographs. Harry had known this. Had prepared for it, as much as anyone could prepare for something like that. But hearing Bones say it out loud made the cold in his chest tighten. I know, he said. Let's go. The Wizengamot chamber was electric. Harry felt it the moment he walked through the doors, a charge in the air, a tension that vibrated in the stone walls and the wooden benches and the hushed, expectant faces of hundreds of witches and wizards. This was different from the tribunals and votes that had come before. Those had been political theater, important but procedural, played out in the language of law and precedent. This was something rawer. A man's life was at stake, and everyone in the room knew it. Harry took his seat in the petitioners' section, flanked by Griphook and Ragnarok. Neville and Augusta were in the long-bottom seats, 3 rows up. Across the chamber, Malfoy sat with his reduced coalition, his face a porcelain mask. Behind him, in the general hereditary seats, Harry saw faces he recognized from the files: Knott, Parkinson, Crabbe, Goyle. The old guard. The survivors. The men who had worn silver masks and knelt before a Dark Lord and walked away free because money and connections and a convenient curse had provided the alibi they needed. If Sirius Black was declared innocent today, their alibis started to crumble. Every imperious defense, every claim of coercion, every convenient amnesia would be called into question. They knew it. Harry could see it in the rigidity of their postures, the tight lines of their mouths, the way their eyes tracked him as he crossed the chamber floor. Good. Let them sweat. Dumbledore called the session to order. His voice was measured, careful, stripped of the grandfatherly warmth he usually projected. He looked old today, Harry thought. Not the ageless, twinkling wizard of public image, but an old man carrying the weight of decisions he was only now beginning to understand had been wrong. This session of the Wizengamot is convened for the trial of Sirius Orion Black, accused of the murder of Peter Pettigrew and 12 Muggles on November 1, 1981, and of conspiracy to commit murder as a supporter of the Dark Lord known as Voldemort. The chamber flinched at the name. Dumbledore ignored it. The accused has been held in Azkaban prison without trial for 6 years and 4 months. This proceeding will determine his guilt or innocence. Bring in the accused. The doors at the back of the chamber opened. 2 Aurors came through first, wands drawn, flanking the entrance. Then 2 more, behind them, and between them. Harry's breath stopped. Sirius Black was a skeleton wearing skin. That was the first, visceral impression, a man reduced to his component parts, bones and sinew and not much else, wrapped in the grey rags of an Azkaban uniform that hung from his frame like a shroud. His hair was long, matted, hanging past his shoulders in tangles that might once have been black and were now streaked with grey. His face was gaunt, the cheekbones sharp enough to cast shadows, the eyes sunken in dark hollows. But the eyes were alive. That was what Harry noticed second, after the shock of the man's physical state had passed, the eyes. They were grey, like storm clouds, and they were burning. Not with madness, though Harry could see the scars of it, the twitches, the flinches, the way Sirius's gaze darted to the corners of the room as if expecting something terrible to emerge from the shadows. But beneath the damage, beneath the years of Dementors and darkness and despair, something had survived. Something fierce and defiant and unbroken. Sirius was led to the chair at the center of the chamber floor. It was a heavy, iron thing, bolted to the stone, with chains that moved on their own, enchanted restraints that were supposed to bind the accused automatically. They rattled and reached for Sirius's wrists. No, Harry said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. The chains stopped. The chamber went still. He's here for a trial, not a sentencing, Harry said. He sits unchained. Dumbledore hesitated. Fudge, seated at the tribunal bench, opened his mouth to object. Before either could speak, Bones cut in. The petitioner is correct. The accused has not been convicted by this body. Standard presumption of innocence applies. Release the chains. Dumbledore waved his wand. The chains withdrew, slithering back into the arms of the chair with a metallic hiss. Sirius sat in the iron seat, unchained, and his burning grey eyes found Harry across the chamber. Harry met his gaze. He saw confusion there. Sirius didn't know him, couldn't recognize the baby he'd last seen 6 years ago in the boy sitting across the room. But he saw the scar. Harry watched the moment it registered, watched Sirius's eyes widen, watched his cracked lips form a word that might have been Harry but produced no sound. Harry nodded, once. I'm here. I'm fighting for you. Hold on. Something in Sirius's expression shifted. The wildness didn't leave, couldn't leave, not after 6 years of hell, but underneath it, something steadied. He sat up straighter in the iron chair, and when he faced the tribunal, his jaw was set. Bones presented the prosecution's case, or rather, demolished it. She was even more devastating than she'd been at the preliminary vote, because now she had a captive audience and the full weight of evidence behind her. The blast analysis. The Animagus records. James Potter's letter. The absence of any prior trial or hearing. The fact that no witnesses had ever been formally interviewed, no evidence formally examined, no defense formally presented. She laid it out like bricks in a wall, one piece at a time, and when she was finished, the wall was solid and the prosecution's case was rubble at its feet. The DMLE's conclusion, Bones said, her voice ringing through the silent chamber, is that the evidence used to imprison Sirius Black was never properly examined, that the assumptions underlying his conviction are contradicted by forensic analysis, and that there are substantial grounds to believe that Peter Pettigrew, not Sirius Black, was the individual responsible for the explosion on November 1, 1981, and for the betrayal of James and Lily Potter to the Dark Lord. The chamber erupted in noise. Dumbledore's gavel cracked 3 times before order was restored. The defense may question the accused, Dumbledore said. Under veritaserum, as is standard for capital cases. Veritaserum. The truth serum. Harry had argued for this, had insisted on it, over Griphook's caution, because there was no stronger proof of innocence than a man telling the truth when he literally could not lie. A ministry potioneer stepped forward with a small crystal vial. Sirius looked at it, looked at Harry, and opened his mouth without hesitation. 3 drops on the tongue. His eyes glazed slightly as the potion took hold, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse, cracked from years of screaming in silence, but steady. Bones asked the questions. Simple, direct, devastating. Were you the secret keeper for James and Lily Potter? No. Sirius's voice rasped like sandpaper. We switched. Last minute. James and I, we thought it was clever. Everyone would assume it was me, so we made it Peter instead. A bluff. The perfect bluff. His face contorted. It was the worst decision we ever made. Did you betray the Potters to Voldemort? No. Never. I would have died first. I would have died 1,000 times. Did you kill Peter Pettigrew? No. I tried. God help me, I tried. I tracked him down after James and Lily, his voice broke. He breathed, ragged and raw, and continued. I found him on that street. I was going to kill him. But he was faster. He screamed for the whole street to hear, Sirius, how could you, James and Lily, how could you, and then he blew the street apart. Cut off his own finger. Transformed. A rat. He went down the sewer as a rat and I was standing there in the middle of the rubble with 13 dead people and he stopped. I laughed. I couldn't stop laughing. Because it was so stupid. The whole thing was so stupid and my best friend was dead and the rat had won. The chamber was silent. Absolutely, completely silent. Harry could hear his own heartbeat, and he could feel the weight of every eye in the room, and he could see, on face after face after face, the dawning, terrible realization that an innocent man had been in hell for 6.5 years while the guilty one walked free. Bones continued. Methodical. Relentless. She walked Sirius through the night of October 31st, where he'd been, what he'd done, how he'd discovered the Potters' deaths. She walked him through his pursuit of Pettigrew, the confrontation on the street, the explosion, the arrest. Every answer was consistent with the evidence. Every answer was consistent with James Potter's letter. And every answer was delivered under veritaserum, which meant every answer was the truth. When Bones finished, she turned to the tribunal. No further questions. Dumbledore looked at the prosecution bench. Does the prosecution wish to cross-examine? The prosecution, a junior ministry lawyer who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth, stood, shuffled his papers, and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, no questions. Someone in the gallery laughed. It was not a kind laugh. Dumbledore's gaze swept the chamber. Does any member of the Wizengamot wish to question the accused? Silence. Malfoy sat in his seat like a statue, his face betraying nothing. His coalition was stone-faced, rigid, and pointedly not meeting anyone's eyes. Very well. Dumbledore straightened in his chair. Whatever he was feeling, guilt, regret, the weight of his own complicity, he buried it beneath the formality of the moment. The Wizengamot will vote. On the charge of murder in the deaths of 12 Muggles, all who find the accused not guilty, raise your hands. The hands went up. Not slowly this time. Not reluctantly. A wave of them, sweeping through the chamber like wind through wheat. Augusta Longbottom. Amelia Bones. Ogden, Marchbanks, Greengrass, Abbott, Diggory, Macmillan. Dozens. Scores. Even some of Malfoy's coalition, 3 of the 8, breaking ranks, reading the room, choosing survival over solidarity. Harry counted. He didn't need to. The result was overwhelming. On the charge of conspiracy with the Dark Lord, all who find the accused not guilty. The same wave. Even larger. Fudge, who had voted against the trial itself, raised his hand with the hasty enthusiasm of a man scrambling onto a lifeboat. On the charge of the murder of Peter Pettigrew, all who find the accused not guilty. Every hand in the chamber went up. Every single one. Even Malfoy's, raised at the last possible second, a concession so grudging it was almost physically painful to watch. Dumbledore looked at the chamber. He looked at Sirius Black, sitting in the unchained chair with tears running down his gaunt face. And when he spoke, his voice was rough. Sirius Orion Black. You are found not guilty on all charges by unanimous verdict of the Wizengamot. You are a free man. On behalf of this body and the Ministry of Magic, I offer our deepest apologies for the grave injustice you have suffered. The chamber exploded. Cheers, shouts, the stamp of feet. The gallery was on its feet, the press box was pandemonium, and Rita Skeeter was crying, actually crying, tears streaming down her face while her quick quotes cool scribbled with manic speed, because whatever else she was human, and even she could recognize a wrong being righted. Harry stood. His legs were shaking, and he didn't care, and he walked across the chamber floor toward the iron chair where Sirius Black sat with his face in his hands and his shoulders heaving. The Auror Guard stepped aside. The crowd noise faded to a buzz. Harry stopped in front of the chair and looked down at the man his parents had loved more than almost anyone in the world. Sirius. Sirius looked up. His face was wet, his eyes red, and up close, the damage was even worse than it had seemed from across the room, the hollow cheeks, the yellowed skin, the scars on his wrists where the chains had rubbed. But his eyes found Harry's, and something in them ignited. Harry. His voice was a wreck, a ruin of what it must have been, but the name came out whole. You're so, God, you look like James. You look exactly like James, except, the eyes. I know. I have my mother's eyes. Sirius made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Lily's eyes. Yeah. Yeah, you do. He reached out, hesitated, as if afraid that touching Harry would prove this was another Dementor-induced hallucination. Is this real? Harry took his hand. It was thin, the bones sharp under papery skin, and it was trembling. Harry held it in both of his, and Excalibur pulsed at his hip, warm and steady, and he felt, for the first time in a way that was purely Harry, not Arthur, not the king, just the boy, a connection to the life his parents had lived and the people they had loved. "It's real," Harry said. "You're free. I've got you. And you're never going back there." Sirius's hand tightened on his. The trembling didn't stop, but the grip was fierce, desperate, the grip of a man holding on to the first real thing he'd touched in 6 years. "James," Sirius whispered. "He wrote to you. He told you. He told me everything. And I came. It just took me a little longer than it should have." Sirius laughed again, and this time it was almost a real laugh, broken and wet but real, and he pulled Harry forward into an embrace that was all sharp bones and shaking limbs and the desperate, crushing need of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to hold someone. Harry held on. The chamber was roaring around them, but inside the embrace, it was quiet. Just two people, connected by love and loss and a dead man's letter, finding each other at the end of a very long road. "I'm going to take care of you," Harry said into Sirius's shoulder. "I promise." "You're 8 years old," Sirius rasped. "I'm supposed to take care of you. We'll figure it out." Sirius's arms tightened, and he pressed his face into Harry's hair, and he was crying, and Harry was crying, and neither of them cared that the entire Wisingamot and half the press corps of magical Britain was watching. Some things were more important than dignity. The aftermath was chaos. Sirius was taken to St. Mungo's Hospital directly from the Wisingamot. Bones had arranged it in advance, anticipating the verdict. The healers took one look at him and admitted him to the long-term care ward, citing severe malnutrition, Dementor exposure syndrome, psychological trauma, and at least 3 untreated injuries that had healed wrong and needed to be rebroken and set. Harry stayed with him for the first 2 hours, sitting in a chair beside the hospital bed while healers came and went and Sirius drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, he talked, fragments, disconnected, jumping between past and present, between lucidity and confusion. He talked about James, about Lily, about Hogwarts, about the war. He talked about Azkaban, in brief, terrible bursts that he'd cut off mid-sentence with a flinch, as if the words themselves had teeth. And he talked about Harry. "I was there when you were born," Sirius said, his voice fading but his grip on Harry's hand iron strong. James practically fainted. Big, brave Gryffindor, fought Death Eaters, nearly passed out in the delivery room. Lily threw a bedpan at him. He smiled, and for a moment, through the ruin of his face, Harry could see the man he'd been, handsome, laughing, full of reckless joy. "You were so small. So small and so loud. You screamed for 3 hours straight and then you looked at me and stopped. Just stopped. Looked right at me with those big green eyes and went quiet, like you'd been waiting for me to show up." Harry's chest ached. "Sounds like me." "Yeah." Sirius's eyes were closing. "Yeah, it does." His hand relaxed, and he slipped into sleep, and Harry sat beside him and watched the monitors track his vital signs and felt the weight of everything, the victory, the grief, the years lost, the years ahead, settle onto his shoulders like a cloak. Ragnarok appeared at the door of the hospital room. The old goblin looked at Sirius's sleeping form, then at Harry, and said nothing for a long moment. "The Wisingamot has voted to award Black full compensation," Ragnarok said finally. "Back pay for his years of imprisonment, medical costs covered, and formal restoration of his seat, titles, and property. The Black family vault, which was frozen pending his conviction, is being released." "Good. There is also the matter of guardianship. Black is your godfather. With his name cleared, he has a legal claim, the strongest claim, in fact, given your parents' will." Harry looked at Sirius. Asleep, the man looked fragile, diminished, a shadow of whoever he'd been. He would need months to recover physically. Longer for the psychological damage. He was in no condition to be anyone's guardian, and they both knew it. Joint custody, Harry said. Sirius and Gringotts. He's my godfather, and I want him in my life, but he needs time to heal, and I need the stability the goblins provide. When he's really ready, we renegotiate. Ragnock nodded. Pragmatic. I'll draft the paperwork. He paused. Harry. What you did today, what you've done over the past year, the Goblin Nation does not forget. You have honored the Pendragon Compact in ways that go beyond obligation. 15 centuries we waited, and the king who returned was worth the wait. Harry's throat tightened. He'd heard praise from Ragnock before, but never like this, raw, sincere, stripped of the old goblin's usual diplomatic reserve. We're not done, Harry said. Pettigrew is still out there. Voldemort is still out there, somewhere, in some form. And the system that put Sirius in that cell is still broken. No. We're not done. But today was a victory. Take it. Feel it. Tomorrow you can go back to war. Harry allowed himself a small, tired smile. You sound like Merlin. He used to say the same thing after battles. Celebrate the win, you stubborn bastard, before you start planning the next one. Ragnock's mouth twitched. Merlin was wise. Occasionally. Harry stayed at St. Mungo's until evening, then let Griphook take him home. Neville was waiting at the manor, having refused to leave until he knew Harry was all right. They sat in the kitchen and ate Mipsy's soup. The elf had made enough to feed a regiment, because feeding people was how Mipsy expressed every emotion she had, and Harry told Neville about the hospital, about Sirius, about the plans for joint custody. He's going to be okay? Neville asked. He's going to be alive. Okay is going to take longer. Harry stared into his soup. 6 years, Neville. They took 6 years from him. The best years of his life. And nobody did anything. Dumbledore didn't do anything. The Ministry didn't do anything. They just let him rot. You did something. I should have done it sooner. Harry. You were 6 when you found out about all this. 6. You've been fighting for him since the moment you knew. You can't blame yourself I'm not blaming myself. I'm blaming everyone who could have done something and didn't. And I'm making sure it never happens again. Harry set down his spoon. The cold, clear resolve was back, the steel beneath the surface that was Harry and Arthur both, the part of him that saw injustice and couldn't look away. The system is broken. Not just the parts that failed Sirius. The whole thing. The Ministry, the Wisengamot, the laws that let people like Malfoy buy their way out of justice while innocent people suffer. Arthur tried to build something better. He tried, and he failed, because the rot was too deep and he saw it too late. He looked at Neville. I won't see it too late. Neville held his gaze. The boy who'd hidden behind his grandmother a year ago, clutching a toad and stammering through introductions, was gone. In his place was someone steadier, quieter, with a core of something that wasn't dramatic or flashy but was absolutely unbreakable. Then you won't do it alone, Neville said. Whatever you're building. Whatever comes next. I'm in. Harry felt the echo again, the round table resonance, the bone-deep recognition of loyalty offered freely and without condition. Arthur had known this feeling. Had lived for it. Had lost it, in the end, and the loss had been worse than dying. Harry wouldn't lose it this time. I know you are, he said. Sirius came to Potter Manor 3 weeks later. The healers had done what they could, he was still gaunt, still twitchy, still prone to flinching at sudden noises and staring at walls with an expression that was somewhere else entirely. But he could walk, eat, hold a conversation for more than 10 minutes at a stretch, and when he stepped through the front door of the manor and saw the entrance hall, the portraits, the Quidditch goggles on the hook, the Gryffindor scarf on the chair, he stopped dead and made a sound like someone had punched him in the chest. "James's house," he whispered. "You're living in James's house." "Our house," Harry said. "Yours too, now." Sirius stood in the entrance hall for a long time, looking at the traces of his best friend's life, and Harry let him. Some things couldn't be rushed. Some griefs needed to be felt in full before they could be carried. When Sirius finally moved, it was to pick up the Gryffindor scarf. He held it to his face, breathing in, and his eyes closed. "Smells like him. After all this time. Smells like James. Mipsy's been preserving everything. She's very dedicated." Sirius opened his eyes. They were wet, but the smile that broke through was the first genuinely warm expression Harry had seen from him, not the ghosts of old humor, not the fragile attempts at normalcy, but something real and present and alive. "I like this elf already," Sirius said. Mipsy, who had been hovering invisibly in the corridor, let out a squeak of approval and materialized with a tray of sandwiches so large it defied several laws of physics. The adjustment was not easy. Harry hadn't expected it to be. Sirius had nightmares, screaming, thrashing nightmares that echoed through the manor at 2 in the morning and brought Harry running with Excalibur in hand before he remembered that the threat wasn't something a sword could fight. The first time it happened, Harry sat on the edge of Sirius's bed and talked to him until the shaking stopped, and Sirius held onto his arm with a grip that left bruises and said, over and over, "I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm here, I'm not there." "You're here," Harry told him. "You're at Potter Manor. You're free. The Dementors can't reach you." "They can," Sirius whispered. "They're in my head. They'll always be in my head. Then we'll get them out. The goblins have mind healers. The best in the world. We'll get them out, Sirius. I promise." The goblin mind healer started the following week. Her name was Thornmend, and she was approximately as warm and cuddly as a cactus, which suited Sirius's stubborn temperament perfectly. She didn't coddle him. She didn't pity him. She walked into his room, looked at him with eyes that had seen every kind of damage a mind could sustain, and said, "You are broken but not destroyed. We will rebuild. It will hurt. Do you consent? Will I stop screaming at night? Eventually. Then yes." The sessions were private, Harry didn't ask, and Sirius didn't volunteer details. But the nightmares began to ease. Not disappear, nothing disappeared that quickly, but the screaming became less frequent, the flinching less pronounced, the periods of lucidity longer and more stable. By February, Sirius could sit through a meal without startling at the sound of a fork on a plate. By March, he could laugh without it turning into something else halfway through. And he began to remember who he was. Not just the trauma. Not just the grief. The person. Sirius Black was sharp, funny, reckless, deeply loyal, and possessed of a dramatic flair that made Augusta Longbottom look restrained. He told stories about James and Lily that made Harry laugh until his ribs ached, the Marauders' exploits at Hogwarts, the pranks, the detentions, the time James had tried to impress Lily by transfiguring his hair into something impressive and ended up with a head full of peacock feathers for 3 days. He told darker stories too. The war. The Order. The friends they'd lost. He spoke about Remus Lupin, the 4th Marauder, a werewolf, a gentleman who Sirius loved like a brother and who he'd been unable to contact from Azkaban. "He thinks I'm guilty," Sirius said, his voice flat with old pain. "He must." Everyone did. Remus, of all people, he'd have believed it, because he always thought the worst of himself and expected the worst from everyone else. Werewolf thing. The world treats you like a monster long enough, you start believing you deserve monsters for friends. "We'll find him," Harry said. "We'll tell him the truth. He might not believe it. Then we'll make him believe it. I'm told I can be persuasive." Sirius looked at him, and something in his expression was wondering. "You really are something, aren't you?" 8 years old and you talk like, I don't even know. Like someone who's been doing this for centuries. 15 of them, approximately. Sirius shook his head slowly. James would have lost his mind. His son, King Arthur reborn. He'd have had t-shirts made. Bumper stickers. A banner over the front door. Harry grinned. I'll have Mipsy make a banner. Don't you dare. But Sirius was smiling, and it reached his eyes, and Harry filed this moment away in the part of his heart that he was building new, not Arthur's memories, not the boy from the cupboard, but something that belonged to the life he was making now. Spring came. The world turned. And Lucius Malfoy made his final move. Harry didn't see it coming. That was the part that would haunt him later, that with all of Arthur's memories, all of Griphook's training, all of the political awareness he'd cultivated, he didn't see the angle until it was too late to stop it quietly. It started with a rumor. A whisper in the corridors of the ministry, barely audible, easy to dismiss. Something strange happening in the Department of Mysteries. Unusual magical readings. Fluctuations in the wards. The Unspeakables, the ministry's secretive research division, were reportedly concerned but unwilling to elaborate, because unspeakables were, by definition, unspeakable about their concerns. Griphook brought the rumor to Harry in early April. It may be nothing. The Department of Mysteries generates rumors the way Mipsy generates sandwiches, constantly and in excessive quantities. But the timing is suspicious. Why? Because Malfoy has been quiet. Too quiet. Since the trial, he's been invisible, no public appearances, no Wizengamot motions, no political activity at all. A man like Malfoy doesn't go silent without reason. Harry's instincts, both sets, prickled. What's in the Department of Mysteries? Officially? Research. Prophecies. Experimental magic. Artifacts too dangerous or too strange for public knowledge. Griphook hesitated. Unofficially? Nobody knows. Not fully. It's the most restricted area in the ministry. Even the minister doesn't have full access. Can Ragnarok find out more? I'll ask. But Harry, tread carefully. The Department of Mysteries is the one part of the ministry that even goblins approach with caution. Harry treaded carefully. For about a week. Then the attack started. Not physical attacks, not like the Death Eaters at the manor. These were subtler, stranger. Ministry employees began acting oddly. A clerk in the Magical Law Enforcement Office was found wandering the atrium at midnight, blank-eyed, muttering about the Dark Lord's return. An unspeakable was hospitalized after being found in a catatonic state outside the Department of Mysteries, her hands burned black as if she'd been holding fire. A junior Auror, young, promising, with no connection to the Death Eaters, suddenly and violently attacked his partner during a routine patrol, using curses he shouldn't have known and couldn't remember casting afterward. Bones brought the reports to Harry, her face grim. It's possession. Or something like it. The magical signature on all three victims is the same, dark, old, and saturated with soul magic. Harry's blood went cold. Soul magic. The same signature type as the fragment that was in your scar. Smaller, weaker, but the same fundamental nature. Horcrux. The word surfaced from the deep well of knowledge that was Arthur's and Harry's combined. Voldemort had made more than one. Harry had known this, had suspected it since the goblins removed the fragment from his scar, but the confirmation was something else. Somewhere in the ministry, a piece of Voldemort's soul was active, and it was reaching out, touching minds, corrupting everything it contacted. Where is it? Harry asked. We don't know. The Department of Mysteries is the most likely location, based on the proximity of the incidents. But accessing the department requires clearances that even I don't have. Then we get clearances. Harry, people are being hurt, Amelia. Possessed, attacked, burned. If there's a Horcrux in the Ministry, it doesn't care about clearances and protocols. It will keep spreading, keep corrupting, until someone deals with it. He stood. I need to talk to Ragnarok. The meeting with Ragnarok was held in the deepest conference room in Gringotts, a windowless chamber warded against every form of eavesdropping known to goblin or wizard kind. Present were Harry, Ragnarok, Griphook, Ironclaw, Bones, and Sirius, who had insisted on coming despite Thornman's advice and Harry's protestations. I spent 6 years in a cell, Sirius had said, his jaw set in a way that Harry was learning meant the argument was over. I'm done sitting on the sidelines. Harry had looked at him, at the still thin frame, the haunted eyes, the tremor in his hands that showed up when he was tired, and seen what he'd seen in Neville a year ago. Not fitness, not readiness, but will. The absolute refusal to be left behind. Fine, Harry had said. But you stay close to me. Now they sat around the conference table, and Ragnarok laid out what goblin intelligence had gathered. The source is a diary, Ragnarok said. A small, black, leather-bound book, enchanted with the most sophisticated soul magic our analysts have ever encountered. It was introduced into the Department of Mysteries approximately 6 weeks ago, through channels we are still tracing. But the preliminary evidence points to Lucius Malfoy. Malfoy, Bones said, and her voice was flat with fury. The diary appears to have been in his possession since the end of the First War, likely entrusted to him by the Dark Lord for safekeeping. Our analysis suggests Malfoy doesn't fully understand what it is. He knows it's dark, knows it's dangerous, and has deployed it as a weapon, but he believes it to be a cursed artifact, not a fragment of a soul. It doesn't matter what he believes, Harry said. It matters what it's doing. A Horcrux in the Ministry, influencing people, possessing them, if it gets stronger, if it finds someone powerful enough to channel through, it could reconstruct, Ragnarok said. Partially. Not a full resurrection, but a shade, a memory given form and power, capable of independent action. Given enough time and enough magical energy to feed on, and the Department of Mysteries is essentially a buffet of exotic magical energy, it could become something very dangerous. The room was quiet. Harry felt Excalibur pulse at his hip, and with it, a surge of something that was pure Arthur, the battle calm, the clarity that came when the enemy was identified and the path was clear. Then we go in, Harry said. Tonight. The Ministry won't authorize it, Bones said. Fudge would never, Fudge doesn't need to authorize it. I'm the Pendragon heir. The founding authority of magical Britain. In times of crisis, the Pendragon has the right to act in defense of the realm without Ministry approval. It's in the original charter, the one this entire government is built on. He looked at Ragnarok. Am I wrong? You are not wrong. The Pendragon prerogative has never been invoked, but it has never been legally revoked. Then I'm invoking it. Tonight, we enter the Department of Mysteries, we find the diary, and we destroy it. Harry looked around the table. I won't order anyone to come with me. This is a volunteer operation. The diary is a Horcrux, and Horcruxes fight back. I'm coming, Sirius said immediately. Sirius, don't. Don't you dare try to bench me. That thing in there is a piece of the bastard who killed James and Lily. I'm coming. Harry looked at him. The tremor was gone. Sirius's hands were steady on the table, and his eyes were burning the way they'd burned in the Wisengamot chamber, fierce, alive, unbroken. Not healed. Not whole. But present, and willing, and absolutely certain. All right, Harry said. I'll have a team of Aurors on standby, Bones said. I can't go in with you. If this goes wrong, someone needs to be on the outside to manage the fallout. But my people will secure the perimeter. Ironclaw and I will accompany you, Ragnarok said. The Pendragon Compact requires goblin protection. More than that, this is a soul artifact, and goblins have been destroying dark artifacts since before wizards had wands. We know what we're dealing with. Then we go at midnight, Harry said. When the ministry is empty and the diary has the fewest potential hosts to reach for. The table agreed. The plan was set. And as they filed out of the conference room, Sirius fell into step beside Harry and said, quietly, "You know, James and I used to sneak into the ministry after hours. 7th year. We had this plan to prank the entire Auror office, fill it with conjured ducks. We made it as far as the atrium before we got caught." Ducks? It was James's idea. He had a thing about ducks. Don't ask me why. Sirius's mouth quirked. Point is, I know the ministry's layout. Including some passages that aren't on any official map. Harry looked at him. Marauder knowledge. Marauder knowledge. We mapped every secret passage in Hogwarts. You think we stopped there? For the first time all day, Harry felt something other than grim determination. He felt the warmth of connection, of shared purpose, of going into danger with someone who had your back not because of duty or politics but because of love. Tell me about the passages, Harry said. Sirius grinned. It was a shadow of what it must once have been, the legendary Sirius Black Grin, the one that had reportedly caused 3 separate witches to walk into walls during his Hogwarts years, but it was real, and it was fierce, and it was aimed at the right enemy. Thought you'd never ask. The Ministry of Magic at midnight was a different creature from the Ministry by day. The atrium was dark, the fireplaces cold, the fountain still. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the polished floor, and the silence was so complete that Harry could hear the distant hum of the building's ward system, a low, subsonic vibration that he felt in his teeth. They came in through Sirius's passage, a hidden entrance behind a false wall in a Muggle underground station, leading to a narrow tunnel that opened into a maintenance corridor on level 9. The Department of Mysteries. Harry led. Excalibur was drawn, its glow dimmed to a faint luminescence that provided just enough light to see by without broadcasting their position. Behind him, Sirius moved with a prowling, silent grace that was half-trained wizard, half-animagus instinct. Ragnarok and Ironclaw brought up the rear, the old director carrying no visible weapon but radiating a quiet menace that suggested he didn't need one, and Ironclaw with a new war axe and an expression of professional anticipation. The Department of Mysteries was a labyrinth. Corridors branched and curved in ways that didn't match the building's external dimensions, and the doors were unmarked, identical, black. Harry could feel magic everywhere, layered, complex, ancient in places, experimental in others. The department was saturated with it, drenched in decades of research and contained power and things that pushed at the boundaries of what magic could do. And underneath it all, like an infection in a wound, something dark. Harry followed the darkness. Excalibur guided him, the blade's glow shifted as he moved, brightening when he turned toward the source, dimming when he turned away. A compass pointing at corruption. The sword hummed in his hands, eager, straining toward the thing it was made to destroy. They passed through a room full of time. Harry recognized it from the feel, clocks ticking at different speeds, hourglasses running backward, a bell jar in which something was being born and dying and being born again in an endless cycle. They didn't linger. They passed through a room full of thought. Tanks of shimmering, pearlescent liquid that Harry understood, instinctively, were memories, preserved, stored, swimming in their containers like luminous fish. One of the tanks was cracked, leaking a slow trickle of silver onto the floor. Dark residue streaked the glass. "It's been here," Harry said. "The diary's influence. It's spreading through the department, contaminating everything." "How much further?" Sirius asked. His wand was drawn, his face tight with concentration, and Harry could see him fighting the old reflexes, the flinches, the paranoia, the trained response to darkness and danger that Azkaban had burned into him. He was holding close. Through here. The last door opened into a room that was different from the others. It was circular, smaller, with walls of rough stone that reminded Harry, with a jolt of recognition, of the deepest vault in Gringotts. The same ancient stone. The same sense of immense age. And at the center of the room, on a stone pedestal, a small black diary. It was open. The pages were blank, but they weren't, Harry could see, with Excalibur's perception, the magic writhing across them like ink that was invisible to normal sight. Dark, oily, pulsing with a rhythm that was almost organic. The diary was alive. Not metaphorically. The soul fragment inside it had been feeding on the department's ambient magic for weeks, growing stronger, more coherent, more capable of reaching out and touching the minds around it. And it knew they were there. The diary's pages riffled, moving without wind, and a voice came from it, not sound, but thought, pressed directly into their minds. Cold, silky, terrifyingly reasonable. Visitors. How delightful. Harry stepped forward. Excalibur blazed. Don't listen to it, he said. Whatever it says, don't engage. A Horcrux manipulates. It finds your weaknesses and pries them open. The boy with the sword. I know you. I lived in your scar for 5 years. I know the shape of your mind, Harry Potter. I know every fear, every doubt, every secret shame. Do you think a blade can protect you from yourself? I think, Harry said aloud, that the last fragment of you that tried to live in my head got burned out by goblin ritual magic and screamed all the way into a crystal jar. So your track record against me isn't great. The diary's pages stopped moving. The mental voice went quiet for a moment, and when it returned, the silky tone had an edge to it. You are not what I expected. I get that a lot. Harry moved toward the pedestal. 2 steps. 3. Excalibur's glow was blinding now, white gold light flooding the chamber, and the diary reacted, the black leather cover rippled, the pages fluttered wildly, and the dark magic that had been contained within it began to bleed outward, pooling on the pedestal, dripping to the floor. The shadows in the room deepened. Thickened. Took shape. A figure rose from the diary like smoke from a fire. Tall, dark-haired, handsome in a way that was too perfect, too symmetrical, like a face designed by someone who understood beauty intellectually but had never felt it. Tom Riddle. Young. The Hogwarts prefect. The charming, brilliant boy who had become the most feared wizard in a century. He looked real. Solid. His Hogwarts robes were crisp, his Slytherin tie perfectly knotted, and he stood on the stone floor with the casual confidence of someone who owned everything he could see. Harry Potter, Tom Riddle said. His voice was real now, audible, resonant, filling the chamber. The boy who lived. And, something else. Something old. His dark eyes narrowed. Pendragon. How interesting. How dead, Harry said, and swung Excalibur. The shade moved. Fast, faster than anything that wasn't fully physical had a right to move. He flowed backward like water, the blade passing through the space where he'd been, and his hand came up and a bolt of dark magic lashed out, crackling black lightning that filled the chamber with the stench of ozone and corruption. Harry caught it on the blade. The dark magic broke against Excalibur's edge the way the killing curse had broken, the way every form of darkness broke against the sword that was forged to end it. But Riddle was stronger than the Death Eaters had been. Stronger than a cursed brooch, stronger than a couple of hired thugs. The shade had been feeding for weeks, gorging on the department's magic, and it was dense with stolen power. Riddle struck again. And again. The chamber became a storm of dark magic and white gold light, bolts of black lightning crashing against Excalibur's radiance, the stone walls cracking under the pressure, the air itself screaming with the collision of opposing forces. Harry moved through it the way Ironclaw had taught him, small, fast, the blade an extension of his will rather than just his arm, and Riddle moved to match him, flowing and reforming, attacking from angles that a physical being couldn't reach. You're strong for a memory, Harry said, parrying a curse that would have liquefied his bones. And you're strong for a child. Riddle's perfect face twisted into something ugly. But you are a child. Arthur Pendragon's echo in an 8-year-old's body. How long can you sustain this? How long before the flesh fails and the spirit can't compensate? Riddle was trying to outlast him. Harry recognized the strategy. It was what any smart fighter did against a more powerful but less enduring opponent. Drag out the fight. Force expenditure. Wait for the moment of weakness. Harry didn't give him the moment. He stopped fighting Riddle and attacked the diary. It was a shift so sudden that the shade didn't react in time. Harry pivoted, lunged past the ghostly figure, and drove Excalibur into the open diary on the pedestal. The blade punched through the black leather cover and into the stone beneath, and the white gold light didn't just flare, it detonated. The diary screamed. Not the cold, controlled more actions continental voice from before, a raw, animal shriek of agony that came from everywhere and nowhere, that shook the walls and cracked the ceiling and drove Harry to his knees with its sheer, unbearable volume. The shade of Tom Riddle convulsed, his perfect face splitting like a mask, the handsome features warping and distorting as the soul fragment that sustained him began to come apart. No. Riddle's voice was a thunderclap. He threw everything he had at Harry, a torrent of dark magic, black and red and screaming with malice, a last desperate strike aimed not at the body but at the mind. Harry felt it hit his mental defenses like a battering ram, felt the shade clawing at the edges of his consciousness, trying to get in, trying to find a foothold the way the scar fragment once had. It found Arthur. Not a weakness. Not a crack to exploit. It found the memory of a king who had faced darkness before, who had stood on a green hill at Camlin and watched his kingdom burn and driven his sword into the heart of the thing that destroyed it. The shade recoiled. It was like a man reaching into what he thought was shadow and finding fire instead, a fire that had been burning for 15 centuries, steady and patient and absolutely merciless. Harry gripped Excalibur's hilt with both hands and pushed. Not with muscle. With will. With the combined force of everything he was, the boy from the cupboard, the king from the legends, the son of parents who had died rather than let darkness win. He pushed, and Excalibur sang, and the white gold light poured through the blade and into the diary like water into a shattered vessel. The diary came apart. Not slowly, it exploded, the black leather disintegrating, the pages shredding into fragments that burned white as they separated, the dark magic that had saturated them boiling away like fog in sunlight. The shade of Tom Riddle screamed one last time, a sound of pure, uncomprehending fury, the rage of something that had cheated death and was now being dragged back to face it, and then it dissolved. Came apart at the seams. Unraveled like smoke in a hurricane, the stolen features losing cohesion, the dark eyes going blank, the mouth still open in that final scream as it faded and thinned and was gone. The chamber was silent. Harry knelt on the stone floor with Excalibur driven through the pedestal, breathing hard, his whole body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline and the aftershock of channeling that much power through a frame that was 8 years old and not designed for it. His hands were locked on the hilt. He couldn't let go. The sword was still blazing, still burning, still pouring light into the space where the diary had been, making absolutely certain that every last trace of the soul fragment was destroyed. Harry. Sirius's voice. Close. Hands on his shoulders, warm and real. Harry, it's done. It's over. Let go. Harry's fingers unclenched, one by one. Excalibur's light faded, slowly, reluctantly, as if the sword itself was unwilling to stand down. The blade dimmed from blinding white to its usual steady glow, and Harry sagged sideways, and Sirius caught him. "I've got you," Sirius said. "I've got you, kid." Harry leaned into his godfather's chest and closed his eyes. He could hear Sirius's heartbeat, fast, but steady. Alive. Present. Real. Behind them, Ragnarok and Ironclaw were examining the ruins of the pedestal, speaking in low, rapid gobbledygook. The chamber smelled like burned parchment and ozone and something cleaner underneath, the scent of purified stone, of corruption burned away. "Is it gone?" Harry asked, without opening his eyes. "If it's not," Ironclaw said, "then it's hiding from me, and nothing in the history of creation has ever been that clever." Harry let out a breath that felt like it came from the bottom of his soul. Good. He let Sirius help him up. His legs were unsteady, the magical expenditure had been enormous, and his body was paying the price. But Excalibur slid free from the shattered pedestal easily, the blade unmarked, the glow steady, and when Harry sheathed it, he felt the sword settle against his hip with the satisfied weight of a job done. Ragnarok approached. The old goblin's face was unreadable, but his eyes were bright, and when he spoke, his voice held a gravity that went beyond the moment. 2, Ragnarok said. 2 fragments of the Dark Lord's soul, destroyed. The one in your scar and now this. If there are more, and given what we know of Voldemort's obsession with immortality, there almost certainly are, they will need to be found and destroyed before he can truly be ended. I know, Harry said. But not tonight. No. Not tonight. Ragnarok inclined his head. Tonight, you rest. You've earned it. They left the Department of Mysteries through the same passage they'd entered. The Ministry was still dark, still silent, but the quality of the silence had changed, cleaner, lighter, as if the building itself had been holding its breath and could now exhale. Bones's aurors were waiting at the perimeter, tense and ready, and they relaxed visibly when Harry's group emerged intact. Bones took one look at Harry, pale, shaking, leaning on Sirius, with Excalibur at his hip and the ghost of something terrible in his eyes, and said, report later. St. Mungo's now. I don't need a hospital. That wasn't a suggestion. Harry opened his mouth to argue, and Sirius squeezed his shoulder and said, pick your battles, kid. This isn't one of them. Harry went to St. Mungo's. The healers confirmed what he already knew, magical exhaustion, severe but not dangerous. Rest, fluids, and chocolate, apparently the universal magical remedy for exposure to dark forces. Harry ate an unreasonable amount of chocolate, slept for 14 hours, and woke up in a hospital bed with Neville asleep in the chair beside him and a stack of daily prophets on the bedside table. The headline on the top paper was enormous. Dark artifact discovered in Ministry. Pendragon heir destroys remnant of HEWHO must not be named. Beneath it, in slightly smaller type, Lucius Malfoy arrested in connection with artifacts placement, DMLE raids Malfoy Manor. Harry picked up the paper and read. Bones had moved fast, faster than he'd expected. The destruction of the diary had been the catalyst, but the groundwork had been laid months ago, in the financial records Gringotts had shared, in the Death Eater attack investigation, in the slow, methodical accumulation of evidence that Bones had been building since the day Harry first walked into her office. The diary was the final piece, the piece that connected Malfoy directly to Voldemort, that shattered the Imperius defense once and for all, that gave Bones the legal justification to do what she'd wanted to do for years. Malfoy Manor had been raided at dawn. The DMLE had found a collection of dark artifacts that made the diary look like a party trick, cursed objects, forbidden texts, items bearing the dark mark, and a hidden chamber beneath the drawing room that contained enough evidence to put Lucius Malfoy in Azkaban for the rest of his natural life. Lucius Malfoy had been arrested at his home, in front of his wife and son. The prophet had a photograph, Malfoy being led out in enchanted restraints, his silver hair disheveled, his mask finally and completely shattered. Behind him, in the doorway of the manor, a pale-haired boy about Harry's age stood watching with an expression that was beyond shock, beyond fear, somewhere in the territory of a world ending. Harry looked at the photograph of Draco Malfoy for a long time. Then he set the paper down and turned to Neville, who was stirring in the chair, blinking sleep from his eyes. "Hey," Harry said. "You're awake." Neville sat up, relief flooding his face. "You've been out for, Mipsy's been here 3 times. She tried to bring soup into the ward and the healers nearly had a revolt." "That sounds like Mipsy." Harry's mouth twitched. "How serious?" "Downstairs in the cafeteria, eating everything that isn't nailed down and telling your story to anyone who'll listen. I think he's on his 4th telling. It gets more dramatic each time. In the latest version, you were on fire." "I was not on fire." "I know. I told him that." He said the truth was insufficiently heroic and he was making editorial improvements. Neville's expression shifted, the humor fading into something deeper. Harry. Is it really gone? The thing in the diary? It's really gone. And Malfoy? Arrested. It's in the papers. Neville picked up the top prophet and read. Harry watched his face, watched the emotions move across it like weather across a landscape. Relief. Satisfaction. And then, surprisingly, something softer, when he reached the photograph of Draco Malfoy in the doorway. His son, Neville said quietly. Yeah. He's our age. Yeah. Neville set the paper down. He didn't say anything else about it, but the look in his eyes told Harry that his friend was thinking the same thing he was, that the sins of the father were not the sins of the child, and that somewhere in the wreckage of the Malfoy family, a boy their age was learning what it felt like to have everything taken away. Harry filed that thought away. Not for today. Not for tomorrow. But someday, it would matter. He was released from St. Mungo's the following morning, over the healer's protests and under his own power. Sirius was at his side, looking better than he had since his own release from Azkaban. The mission had done something for him, Harry realized. Given him purpose. Reminded him that he was a fighter, not just a survivor. The tremor in his hands was almost gone. They returned to Potter Manor by Port Key, and when they materialized on the front lawn, the whomping willow sapling, now substantially larger than when Neville had planted it, its branches thick and aggressive and very much alive, rustled its limbs in greeting and didn't try to hit anyone, which Neville would later claim was its version of affection. Inside, Mipsy had outdone herself. The kitchen table was buried under enough food for 20 people, and the entrance hall was decorated with what appeared to be hand-painted banners reading "Welcome Home Master Harry" in letters that wobbled enthusiastically. Mipsy, Harry said. Master Harry is a hero and heroes is deserving banners, Mipsy said firmly. Also soup. Sit. Harry sat. Sirius sat next to him. Neville appeared 20 minutes later, dropped off by Augusta, who shook Harry's hand at the door with both of hers and said, "Well done, young man." Well done indeed. They ate. They talked. Sirius told the story again, fifth version, in which Harry was now on fire and flying, which was physically impossible but narratively compelling, and Neville laughed so hard that pumpkin juice came out of his nose, and Mipsy kept bringing more food, and for an hour, the manor was warm and loud and full of the kind of chaos that Harry had never had and had always wanted. After lunch, Harry excused himself. He took Excalibur and walked down to the lake, alone, and sat on the bank in the weak spring sunshine and looked out over the water. 2 Horcruxes destroyed. Malfoy arrested. Sirius free. The Pendragon claim confirmed. In 2 years, he'd gone from a cupboard under the stairs to this, a manor house, a legendary sword, allies, friends, a godfather, a seat of power. Arthur's memories were still there, still surfacing in dreams and instincts, but they were settling now, integrating, becoming part of him rather than overwhelming him. He wasn't Arthur wearing Harry's face. He wasn't Harry burdened with Arthur's past. He was something new. Something that had never existed before. He was 9 in 3 months. Hogwarts was 2 years away. Voldemort was out there somewhere, diminished, disembodied, but not destroyed. The remaining Horcruxes were hidden in places Harry didn't yet know. The political landscape of magical Britain was shifting under his feet, reshaping itself around the return of the Pendragon, and there were people who would fight that reshaping every step of the way. But Harry looked at the challenges ahead and felt not dread but anticipation. The cold, clear resolve that had driven him since Gringotts was still there, still burning, but it was tempered now with something warmer. He had people. Not subjects, not followers, not pieces on a chessboard, people. Neville, who was brave in the quiet way that mattered most. Sirius, who was broken and healing and fierce. Augusta, who was iron wrapped in vulture hats. Ragnarok, who was honor and sharp teeth and 15 centuries of kept faith. Amelia Bones, who was Justice in a monocle. Even Grip Hook and Iron Claw and Mipsy, each of them part of something that was forming around Harry like iron filings around a magnet, not because he demanded it but because he was the kind of person people chose to stand beside. Arthur had called it the Round Table. The idea that a king was only as strong as the people who sat with him, who challenged him, who held him accountable and stood with him when the darkness came. Harry was building a new one. Not with knights and a castle and the trappings of medieval legend, but with friends and allies and a stubborn, unshakable refusal to accept the world as it was when it could be better. He heard footsteps behind him. Sirius settled onto the bank beside him, moving stiffly. His body was still recovering, would be recovering for months yet, and they sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun play across the water. "James would be proud of you," Sirius said eventually. His voice was quiet, rough, but steady. "Lily too. They'd be so damn proud, Harry. I wish I'd known them. You'd have loved them. They'd have loved you back so much it would have been embarrassing. James would have bragged about you to everyone he met. Lily would have been the one quietly making sure you ate your vegetables and didn't get a big head." He paused. "They were the best people I ever knew. And they'd have been amazed at what you've become." Harry leaned into his godfather's side, just slightly. Sirius's arm came around his shoulders, careful, as if Harry were something precious that might break, and Harry let himself be held. "Sirius. Yeah. When I go to Hogwarts, will you be there? Not at the school, I mean, will you be here? When I come home?" Sirius's arm tightened. "Kid, wild hippogriffs couldn't drag me away. You're stuck with me. Godfather's privilege." Harry smiled. It wasn't the sharp, strategic smile he used in the Wizengamot, or the fierce grin of combat, or the careful neutrality he wore for the press. It was just a smile. A 9-year-old boy's smile, warm and unguarded and real. "Good," he said. They sat by the lake as the afternoon faded. The whomping willow rustled on the front lawn. Somewhere inside, Mipsy was clattering in the kitchen, and Neville was probably reading or coaxing something improbable out of the garden, and the manor was alive in a way it hadn't been for a decade. Harry drew Excalibur and laid it across his knees. The blade glowed softly in the fading light, steady as a heartbeat, patient as stone. He ran his fingers along the flat of the blade and felt the sword hum in response, recognition, connection, the bond between a weapon and its wielder that went beyond magic into something that didn't have a name. The once and future king, the prophecy had said. He had been once. He was becoming future. But right now, sitting on the bank of a lake with his godfather's arm around his shoulders and his best friend in the house behind him and a sword in his lap that had waited 15 centuries for his hand, Harry was simply, quietly, profoundly present. There was so much still to do. Hogwarts. The remaining Horcruxes. Voldemort's eventual return. The reformation of a magical government that was held together by tradition and corruption and the inertia of centuries. The long, hard work of building something better from the wreckage of something broken. But not today. Today, Harry sat by the lake with the people he loved, and the sun went down over Potter Manor, and the sword glowed in the gathering dusk, and the world, vast and dangerous and full of shadows, could wait until morning. The king had returned. And he had all the time in the world. Sirius shifted beside him, then spoke with mock gravity. "So. King Arthur, huh? That's me. And the sword. Excalibur. The actual, honest-to-God Excalibur. Yep. And the goblins kneel to you, and you've got a seat on the Wizengamot, and you just destroyed a piece of the most dangerous dark wizard in history. That about covers it." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "Then, James would absolutely have had t-shirts made." Harry laughed. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere warm, somewhere that belonged entirely to the boy and not the king, and it echoed across the lake and up toward the darkening sky, and Sirius laughed with him, and for that moment, that single, perfect, uncomplicated moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The light faded. The stars came out. And in the quiet of Potter Manor, surrounded by friends and family and the beginnings of something that might, one day, be as great as Camelot, Harry Potter Pendragon, the boy who lived, the once and future king, the boy from the cupboard, the wielder of Excalibur, the son of James and Lily, the godson of Sirius, the friend of Neville, the ally of goblins, and the nightmare of dark lords, closed his eyes and let the world be still. Tomorrow, the work would begin again. Tomorrow, there would be battles to fight and wrongs to right and a kingdom to build. But tonight, he was just Harry. And that was enough. It would always be enough.